Thank you for changing that before I made an ass of myself.
Nothing that can't be edited.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. 5, 4. I always get this part wrong. I don't know. I think it's because I get nervous right before. 5, 4, 3. All right, Jan Harzan, how are you?
Good. Good to see you, Cameron.
Welcome to the Cameron Jackson Show.
Yeah.
So, gosh, Jan, this is the story that I think of when I think of you, and it's how we met.
Okay.
And we actually met. Well, first of all, I should say Jan Harzan from MUFON, right?
Correct.
The Mutual UFO Network. And this is it's really a worldwide organization, right?
Right. We operate in 43 countries in all 50 states, so it's quite a global operation, actually.
Yeah, and you've been doing this now how long?
A little over 5 years.
5 years. Okay. So, what'd you do before that?
I worked for IBM for 37 years. I was an executive with IBM, director level.
All right. Fair enough. And so what? Well, I'll get into that in a second. So, well, no, let's just get into it now. What got you from IB? Were you always into UFOs, or and then you went into it full time as MUFON, or what happened?
Sure. Well, when I was a kid, back in the 50s, I hate to say this how old I am, but back in the 50s and 60s, the front page newspaper articles always had flying saucers on them. So that was whenever a sighting occurred, it was front page news. And so as a little boy growing up, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, I would see these newspapers and things like that. And then about 8 years old, my father was getting two men's magazines. One was called True and one was called Argosy. And the Argosy journal, I don't remember the exact month and day, although I think I have a copy of it in my drawer at home, had an article about NICAP, which was one of the leading UFO organizations of the day. And the leader of NICAP was Donald Keyhole. And Donald was a retired major in the Marines. And so as you went on these things, typically as the stories came out in the newspaper, they would always have the piece in there that what the Air Force says it's a balloon, or the Air Force says it's a radar inversion or weather inversion or a radar anomaly or something of that nature. This gentleman was actually saying, no, these are craft from out there. They're extraterrestrial. And I thought that was amazing. Here's a guy who's retired now from the Marines. He's a major, pretty high rank. And he's in charge of this UFO organization. And he's saying, no, that's not true. These are real extraterrestrial craft. So that struck me as a young kid, maybe 8 years old, as, oh my gosh, here's a guy who really knows what he's talking about. So my brother and I, now my brother is a year under me exactly within a few days. His name's Jeff. And Jeff was always he's like a Tesla. I mean, he growing up, he was making crystal radios at 6, 7 years old, literally fixing the neighbors' color television sets, or just say television sets, at the age of 8. Now, of course, let me be clear on that one. Back in those days, they were all vacuum tubes, right? So what you would do is you pull all the vacuum tubes out, you go down to a thrifty drugstore, and you plug them into the vacuum tube tester. He'd find which one didn't work, and he'd buy the right one and go back and plug them all back in. But still, I mean, as an 8-year-old kid, I mean, he was pretty far advanced. And then we were doing experiments with electricity and electromagnetism and things like that. So we decided, based on the reading we were doing, that these craft must be using some kind of electromagnetic engines in them, some kind of a field propulsion system. And we designed a 30-foot craft with 3 pulsed electromagnetic engines in it to drive it. And we were going to build this in our backyard. That was now we're little kids,
right.
But we're going to do this, right?
Right.
So one day my mother was going to the store. I don't think she wanted to leave us home alone, so she wanted to say, come with me. And as we were waiting for her to do her shopping at the store, we went to the magazine rack and we were looking, and down of course, at the very bottom and the very corner, there's a little book called Flying Saucer Review. It was a half-size magazine. It's like 5 by 7, but it was a little short book, and it was from England, UK rather, and these guys wrote about UFO stories. And so we bought a copy for $1, took it home, and I remember us sitting on his bed in the back of the house, reading this book together. And in it, it said, and now in those days, there was no such thing as UFO. It was flying saucers. Everything was a flying saucer. The term UFO didn't get coined until later. But we were looking at the book, the magazine rather, and it said these craft are seen around military installations, nuclear power plants, and places where anti-gravity research is being done. I mean, if you want to see a UFO, those are the 3 places you should be hanging out, because that's where they show up at. So we looked at each other and we said, oh my gosh, we're doing anti-gravity research. Maybe one will show up here, right? I mean, so we're thinking this to ourselves as little kids. And about 30 days later, I don't remember exactly, but about 6:30, that was exactly 6:30 in the morning, he came into my bedroom. I was at one end of the house, and he was at the other end of the house. Now, I was born and raised in the Valley. I was born in Van Nuys, California, and we had a house out. My parents had a house in Woodland Hills, which was a 2-bedroom, but they kept cranking out kids. So they had 4 boys in 5 years. So there were, let's see, that's 4, 6. There were 6 of us in this 2-bedroom house. So there were 2 bunk beds in the 1 bedroom for the 4 boys and their bedroom. And so my dad got the brilliant idea he's going to build a house with 3 bedrooms, so he could put 2 boys in one, 2 boys in the other, and they'll have their own room. So they built a house in Thousand Oaks, California back in 1958, and we moved in April 1st of 1959 when it was completed. And it was a 3-bedroom home. So there were 2 bedrooms, and all the bedrooms were on the back side of the house on the left, and then on the right-hand side was the living room, family room, everything else like that. Well, what happened was they had an oopsie baby. And so along comes and not only do they have an oopsie baby, but it's a girl. So now the plan goes out the window.
Right.
And
you're bunking again.
Yeah. Well, my dad said, I know what I'll do. I'll take the garage, and we'll nail the garage doors shut, and we'll insulate the whole garage, and then we'll panel it, and we'll paint the floor. So we had another room out there. That had a pool table and a ping pong table and his workbench, and it had 2 beds. So he threw 2 of the boys out there, 2 of the boys in the other end of the house, and then my sister got the other bedroom. So I'm out in the garage sleeping at 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday, and my brother, who's at the far end of the other side of the house, comes into my room, says, "There's someone trying to break into my bedroom." And I said, "What do you mean there's someone trying to break into your bedroom?" He said, "Well, they're playing with the screen. You know, I can hear them out there trying to take the screen out of the window." And I said, "Well, did you look out to see who it was?" He said, "No, I didn't look out to see who it was. You know, I mean, are you crazy? There's somebody out there." So I said, "Well, let's go look." So we went back into the house and to the other end, looked into his bedroom from the doorway, and saw his window. There was no motion going on at the time. So I'm thinking, okay, you know, if someone was there, maybe they're gone. I said, "If you want, let's go out in the backyard and take a look." So now this was April, right before, in 1965, right before time change. So it was really bright outside. In other words, the sun was already up above the horizon. Because there are times at 6:30 in the morning when it's pitch black outside. So, but I remember it being very bright outside. And we started to walk down the hallway, and I'm talking to him. I asked him, "Well, what did you hear exactly? You know, what do you think it might be?" And I'm looking back at him as we walked down the hallway, and as we got about 3/4, 4/5 of the way down the hallway, he's looking out towards the living room where we had a wall of windows. There were plate glass windows, large plate glass windows with white drapes in front of him, and the sun was coming in from the backside. And he said, "Look." So I was talking to him this way. I looked, and I didn't see anything. And I said, "What'd you see?" He said, "Well, there was a shadow, someone standing against the window, and when I told you to look, they floated backwards." And I thought that was an interesting comment, floated backwards, like a smooth motion going back, like on roller skates. So I'm thinking, okay, you know, we used to have a thing called rat fink in the day where you would try to pull one over on the other person by telling them some wild story and getting them to believe it.
Right.
So I'm thinking, all right, he's got me up at 6:30 in the morning on a Saturday to just mess with me, you know. So I said, okay, fine, let's go out in the backyard. So we continue through the family room, past the kitchen, before to go into the garage, and I look up at the wall. There's a big clock on the wall that says 6:30. That's how I know it was 6:30 exactly, because I saw the clock. Went into the garage and out the back door to the end of the house and looked back towards his bedroom window. Nothing was there. And then, okay, you got me. You know, I'm out here in the middle of the morning. You know, so I should be in bed sleeping, but I'm here in the middle of the backyard. So I said, "Well, there's nothing there." And so he's scratching his head because he'd heard everything, so he was bought into it's there, right? Turn around and go back in the house and literally froze because 30 feet away, hovering 10 feet off the ground, was a landing craft making a humming noise like a transformer on a telephone pole late at night. If you ever hear that hum they make? Just frozen in the sky, 30 feet from us, 10 feet off the ground, 4 landing gear on it. And I'm standing there going, "Oh my gosh, these things are real." That was the first thought in my head. Oh my gosh, these things are real. Second thought that went through my mind was, this thing looks like it's man-made. And the reason I thought that was because the craft itself was like a brick. If you took a brick, blew it up to 8 to 10 feet long by 4 feet wide by 3 feet high, and completely smoothed the edges, bright orange. I mean, it was bright orange. I mean, it was like metallic orange. Blue corrugated landing gear coming off of it, 4 of them, with black suction cups on the bottom. And then crossbars on the landing gear on both sides that scissored, like a scissoring function. And in the middle of the scissor, of course, there was a bolt. It was the bolt that I saw that made me think this is man-made, because, why would you see a bolt on an extraterrestrial craft? But as I studied it, and I looked at this craft, the first thing that struck me was, well, it's only like 3 feet tall. How do they sit in that? I mean, how do you stand in that thing? You got to be pretty small as a creature, or scrunched up to look at it, unless there's some time dilation in there, which I didn't, as a kid, I didn't know anything about that, but or spatial dilation. But then I noticed that it was completely seamless. I mean, there was not a rivet or a bolt in the structure of the craft itself. And I thought to myself, well, no windows, no door. I'm thinking, how do they get in and out of this thing, right? Because it's just like there, and it's like a solid piece of metal, completely seamless with these landing gear on it. And I said to my brother, I'm going to go in the house and get a camera. So I ran to go into the garage and then go into the house, and we'd locked ourselves out. I didn't even know if it's possible to have done that, but we locked ourselves out. And so I'm pounding on the door as hard as I can. Bang, 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 bang. Now, remember, nobody was up in the house when we went out. So I'm knocking, and all of a sudden I notice a discontinuity in the knock. Bump, bump, a little bump, bump. And I noted that in my brain, but I just kept knocking. About 3 more knocks after that, the door opens, and it's my older brother standing there saying, hey, what's going on? And I said, nothing. And I ran in the house. Now, the reason I said nothing was because I didn't want to stop and explain to him what was going on. I wanted to get the camera and get back out. So I grabbed the camera. He went back to watching the TV, which he was watching. I ran outside, and my brother is standing on top of our swing set. He'd climbed up the slide. There's a ladder up the slide, and he's standing on top of the slide, looking out to the west. And I said, well, where to go? And he said, well, it was there frozen for a second or two, and then all of a sudden it started to slowly drift, and it just shot over the horizon, So we're looking at each other like, okay, who do we tell this to? I mean, I'm 10, he's 9. No one's going to believe us. We didn't tell our parents. We didn't even tell our brother. I mean, we just, okay. And the interesting thing about it is we completely lost interest in building that craft. Isn't that fascinating? It's like lost. Now, years later,
wait, let's back up real quick.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Your brother lets you in.
Right.
And you have that disconnect, that dun-dun.
Yeah. But that was like a fraction. I mean,
okay,
it's instantaneous.
Right. When you got back in the house, what time was it?
Well, that's an interesting thought. I'll just answer that right now. 30 years later, I'm talking to my brother about this. Now, interesting, we never talked about this situation. Like it was like we just kind of.
And you never had that experience again, or
No.
an experience similar to that?
I have not had that experience again. I don't know.
What about your brother?
I think my personal opinion is that when I was going in the house, they switched. However, they manipulate space and time. They're able to shut things off. In our time, our spatial orientation, to us, we're like frozen but it's instantaneous. I mean, you don't notice it. I mean, because it's like here, then it's like, oh, something happened, but you don't really know. I think he was taken. I mean, I do believe my brother was taken. He suffered from post-traumatic stress for years after that. Went off the rails, got into drugs and alcohol. It did not do a good thing for his life. I can say that. For me, it was a different experience.
So go back to your conversation with him, because it's leading somewhere on the time. Is that correct?
Right.
Yeah. So what happened?
So many years later, he said to me, Jan, do you realize that when we went out there, it was 6:30 in the morning and everyone's in bed? I said, yeah, I definitely remember that. And he said, when we came back in, Joel, our older brother, who's now deceased, was up, and he was watching a television program, and he named the program. I didn't have any conscious memories, but that program didn't come on until after 8 o'clock in the morning. So to us, it appeared like we'd gone out there, done this thing. A minute later, we're back in the house. But actually, almost 2 hours of time had elapsed. And, so all I can say is that's what he recalls. I do recall we went out, no one was up. I do recall coming back in, my brother was up watching television, which is interesting because in those days, the old vacuum tube television sets, when you turned them on, it took like a minute and a half to warm up. I mean, they started with a little dot, and it would go out, fill it out, be a white fuzzy screen, and all of a sudden the signal would come in, and it would do it. So if we were only out there for a minute or two, it would have been hard for that TV to have warmed up. And first off, he would have had to gotten out of bed. Then he would have gotten situated. Then he would have turned the TV on. Then he would have sat down and be watching the program. But he was totally engrossed in the program because he didn't have the slightest interest in what we were doing out in the backyard, which I thought was interesting. Why are you guys out in the backyard at 6:30 in the morning? It didn't even dawn on him,
And so full disclosure, I guess on my part, the UFOs and ufology and the abduction well, I refer to it as abduction. The new kind of term for it is experiencers, right? All of that has really been fascinating to me for years. Right? I mean, and I'm not an abductee. I've never even seen. Well, I strike that. I did actually see a UFO once when I was a kid when I lived in Kentucky. I did once, and clearly it wasn't for me. It must have been for somebody else. But other than that, in that one time as a kid, nothing.
Right.
But yet, the abduction side of it is what fascinates me the most, and what from my research, and not only have I done my own research, but I actually was lucky enough because of you to get to talk to and work with David Jacobs, who was like the foremost.
Yeah, I think Kathleen Marden too. Also, she's a
head of our. And then there's it's Yvonne Smith, right?
Yvonne Smith.
Yeah. Yvonne. She's in the area actually. Somebody I'm going to try to get on actually to talk about that stuff, because Yvonne does a lot of. My guess, you tell me if I'm wrong, but my suspicion is she works with a lot of celebrities who have been.
I honestly don't know. I mean, I've known Yvonne for a number of years. I know she's been very heavily into this subject for as long as I can remember, a good 30 plus years. So I don't know who her client base is her private.
Right. No. Well, and I only say that because Grant Cameron has this. He's another researcher.
Sure.
He's brought up this theory that a lot of people in the entertainment industry are actually abductees, and it kind of makes it sort of makes sense when he explains it. But we'll get to that in a second. So anyway. What I found from my research, though, is that it's generational, right? So, like, if you have been abducted, then your parents were abducted, and generally speaking, right now in the world, your grandparents were also abducted.
Right.
Anybody else in your family?
Not that I'm aware of. That's interesting. You should say that. But I do know that Jeff carries a gene in him. I call it the fix-it gene, because my grandfather on my father's side came over from Germany. Actually, it was probably Austria. It was Germany of the day, but I think it was back in 1917. So I think the lines were drawn differently back then. So it might be now Austria today. And he was a very bright kid. He was like 13 years old, came over on his own. We don't really know anything that went on in Europe before that about him. But I think his parents probably wanted to get him out because of all the stuff that was going on at the time. Probably put him on a boat and sent him over here. I'm just guessing. He became the vice president of a car company. I apologize, I don't remember the name of the car company. It's now defunct. It was in Cleveland, so my folks grew up in Cleveland. My dad was born and raised there. But he was obviously, as the vice president of research for a car company, you're kind of into tinkering, as what the researchers do, and engineering do. And then my father, although he was a salesman, he became a camera smith through a correspondence course. And so in his latter years, he would fix cameras for people. I mean, take them apart, Canon, Nikon, all the big cameras, fixed them for the school districts. I mean, he was definitely a craftsman. I mean, things would break in our house, and we wouldn't buy something new. No, my father would go fix it. It used to drive us nuts. We'd have bikes, and like you couldn't destroy the bike, because no matter what you did to it, my father would say, "Oh, I'll bring it here. We'll weld it back together." Right. And we're like, "Now we got these big weld beads all over our bike." It wasn't cool. So because he just didn't have the money, he made what he made, and he had 5 kids. So everyone wore the hand-me-down jeans, right? My older brother would start with the jeans, and the next year they were my jeans, and the year after that they were Jeff's jeans, and down to Jory. I mean, it was funny, because by the time they got the 4th kid, they were pretty beat up. Right. They look kind of like the jeans do today, where we got holes in them. Except back then, you weren't supposed to have holes in your jeans, right?
Right.
So, but he was a fixing guy. And then my brother Jeff picked up the same gene. He could fix pretty much anything. Here's an example. My air conditioner is kind of going on the fritz, because they put cheap air conditioners into new homes, and my home's now about 20 years old. So you bring out the fix-it guy to fix your air conditioner, right? And his first answer is, you need a new air conditioner. I mean, forget about putting parts in it or making it work. You need a new air conditioner. Well, how much is that? $5,000, please. Write the check today. Okay, hold that thought. Hey, Jeff, can you come down to my house and look at my air conditioner? Sure. So he comes down, spends about an hour and a half tearing it apart, diagnosing different things, and says, well, we need a condenser. I said, okay, how much is that going to cost? He says, I don't know, let's go down to the electronics store and get one. So we drive down to the electronics store. $19.95. We buy a little capacitor. He takes it back to the house, another hour and a half. He puts it in, wires it all in, probably solders in. And I don't know what all he did. I didn't watch everything he did, but puts it all back together. Boom, the air conditioner's working. So I'm thinking now really, you have to say, well, that was like 3 hours worth of work. So, work would get $75 an hour. That's probably $250 plus the part, which they probably charge
Jack
twice
up,
for.
yeah, 10 times.
But still, they don't want to fix anything. Nobody wants to fix anything anymore. They all want to just replace it, right? I mean, anything breaks anymore, your VCR, anything, don't fix it. Replace it because it's so cheap, right? Supposedly, except air conditioners aren't cheap; they're $5,000. So, but that's the kind of kid he is. And he's built homes. He fixes friends' cars, washing machine. I mean, and I say to him, Jeff, how do you know how to do all this stuff? He says, I don't know. I just know how to do it. He's never been to school beyond high school. He's never been to a trade school. He just does it. So somehow he knows how to do this stuff. And I suspect that my father had that same gene, and my grandfather had the same gene. So the reason I'm bringing that all up is, I could see that there would be some sort of a lineage here. I never had the opportunity to ask my dad. He was deceased before I had a chance to really talk about this thing. But we did tell our parents about 5 years later, I think I was 15 at the time, about our experience. And their answer was, oh, that's interesting. They didn't believe it, not believe it. They just said, oh, that's interesting. Thank you. So our fear of them rejecting it was unfounded.
Do you think that the fact that they didn't think that it was odd that maybe in fact your dad was also an abductee and just didn't talk about it back then because it was maybe he didn't know, or he didn't understand what was happening, or he knew and he didn't want to scare you guys?
Well, it's interesting. There's a guy named Ed Griffin. You might want to look him up on the Google him, but he ran a bunch of different things. I'm sure some of them good and some, but anyway, he used to run a very alternative kind of thing. He was our neighbor right around the street from us. My parents were good friends with him and some other folks in the neighborhood. So my father would talk about things, like perpetual motion engines and things like that. We'd come up in conversation, but we never talked about flying saucers per se, and we never talked about abductions. I mean, of course, back in those days, abductions weren't really known. The first real reported abduction was the Betty and Barney Hill case, which is what Kathleen Martin is the niece of Betty from Betty and Barney Hill. She's our director of experiential research today, along with George Medich, who's a medical doctor, and a whole team of people who work with people who've been abducted. So I don't know. So
do you think then? Where do you think? What's your overall impression of abductions or experiencers and things like that? Where does that fit into the entire UFO phenomenon? As far as I have my own views on where it fits in.
Yeah.
Where are you kind of at with that? Because there's a lot of theories. There's theories that the abduction phenomenon obviously isn't real, that people are dreaming these things.
Right.
And then there's the theory that, okay, it's real. Mm-hmm. And if you go down, for instance, David Jacobs' path, David Jacobs takes kind of the darker view of it, that they are hybridizing humans, and they're eventually going to take over the world, right? That's kind of the ultimate view he has. And then you have others like... in the past, who was the researcher who was like a Harvard professor?
John Mack.
Yeah, John Mack. John Mack, I think, took kind of a view that they're here to help us, more of a spiritual kind of side.
Yes, more of a spiritual approach. Yes.
Right, and then I'm not sure there's really any other kind of...
Well, Bud Hopkins was in there. He probably tended to be more closer to Jacobs.
Jacobs, yeah, they were. Yeah. He was Jacobs' protege, or Jacobs was his protege, so to speak, right?
Yeah. I don't know, but I know the two of them were more like-minded than John Mack, and so there's this broad spectrum. So here's what my thoughts are. There's a whole lot of things going on here, right? And they get reported as abductions or encounters or experiences to us, but I think what it's pointing to me, and to a lot of other researchers like Grant Cameron and others, that there's a consciousness element to this thing. Like, how is our reality actually created? How does reality become reality for us? And if you think back to my sighting that I related here earlier, we had that moment on the bed when the two of us were reading that magazine, when we said to ourselves, well, we're doing anti-gravity research. Maybe one will come visit us. Well, I don't think that was an accident that 30 days, within the next 30 days, this craft shows up. I think that's somehow related. I can't prove it, but
yeah, and along those lines, there are, if you, I can't think of the name. I'd have Mike pull it up on YouTube, but there's who's the guy? He's in L.A. He's
Eli Marzulli.
He's the one who looks up at the sky and basically focuses on the sky, and he can summon UFOs. They will literally show up, and there's not only him. There's a great, in fact, Mike, try to pull it up, Mike. There's a go to YouTube and do a search, Mike, for UFO. Las Vegas man summons UFO.
He did it live on the news. I think I watched that.
Exactly. There's a guy. It's a great video. It's this dude in Las Vegas who tells this news crew, "I can summon UFOs." And so the news crew is like, "Okay, fine. Let's go out and let's have you summon a UFO." And literally, this guy prays to the UFOs. He might even pray to Jesus. I can't remember. We'll see it here in a second. Yeah. And they're looking, and the UFOs appear in the sky. Okay. And is this the one, Mike? That's it. Yeah, that's it. That's the guy right there. Have you seen this, Jay?
No, I have not seen
that. This is great.
Huh.
Are we going to be able to get audio on it, Mike? He's working on that. So there is definitely a consciousness part to this, right? I mean, like, absolutely there is a consciousness part to this. And I don't know. Is that, you think because you were thinking about UFOs that was enough to bring them in?
Well, I do think that people who think about it, they do show up. I mean, as this gentleman here is kind of showing this crew.
But how does that relate then to the abduction theory or the abduction phenomenon?
That's a good question. I mean, that's what we're trying to figure. We're trying to figure out what exactly is going on, because a good number of abductions experiences don't necessarily have a craft related with it. It's beings in their room at night, you know. So are these interdimensional beings? Are they demonic? Are they angelic? Are they extraterrestrial? What do they really want with these people? And we're trying to collect that data and do it. We just released a 3-year study, Kathleen Marden and her team, that put out, and they presented it at the symposium. I don't have all the facts in front of me for that study, but basically they're showing that for the vast majority of people, I would say it's 80%. It's a positive experience. You know, about 20% have a negative experience to it. And I think a lot of that relates back to kind of your own frame of reference, your own paradigm. Also, what happens to you, I'm sure. For instance, on myself, when I had this experience, well, first off, I have to say, when you have an experience where you have a close encounter of that nature where you're conscious.
I think you're getting the sound, aren't you, Mike?
Do you want to play that?
Yeah, let's play it real quick. This is it.
He's a Las Vegas man who claims he can summon UFOs on command. Pretty wild.
There it is.
Action News reporter Mike Delastruda to get the real story. But what he found shocked everyone and could leave you wondering, are UFOs real?
And forget the
can you move it forward, Mike, on this? Keep going until you get to the guy out in the field. Keep going. There, this guy right here. Start there, yeah.
Secret until now. These beings are here. They're here. They're just sitting right up there.
We met up with Prophet Yahweh, seer of Yahweh, at Doolittle Park off Lake Mead.
And Prophet Yahweh, if you're on the podcast, Prophet Yahweh is this very large African American guy wearing all white here.
I thought I was absolutely nuts.
Until he says he saw UFOs over the years.
And now they're showing the UFO that he summoned.
1,501 today. What do you think? I'll try it.
He says the voice in his head told him to go public now. So we took him up on his offer, and we scanned the skies. Nothing but a few clouds. When the prophet started praying for a sighting, I wasn't exactly convinced.
I pray, oh Yahweh, that you send a sighting so that they know that I am not mentally ill. I am not a false prophet, like those who seek to kill me say I am.
I see something straight up.
Oh, brother, look at it. There it is.
You can barely see it, a white speck. Then another sighting.
There it is. I got it.
And there's these white orbs in the sky that just show up.
Let's take a closer look here. It's an orange sphere that appeared out of nowhere. I call the boss with an unexpected change in my story.
Yeah, all right, that's good, Mike. Thanks. So the unexpected change in my story. Yeah, this is real, boss.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to run with this one.
Yeah.
So are they seeing on their research though? What I tend to see for me, I tend to gravitate towards, and maybe this is just how my mind works, but I tend to be drawn more to the Jacob side of things, right? Like what. All of these people in his research, and it's quite extensive, have had work done to them, have had semen extracted from them, have had eggs extracted from the ovaries. Women have been impregnated, have been pregnant for a short period of time, and then they've had not their uterus, but the embryo extracted. over and over and over again, he gets these same kinds of stories.
Right.
How does that meld then with the they're just here to help us side of the abduction theory?
Well, I don't think they're here to help us or even to hurt us. I think they're just here to do whatever they're here to do. So, you know, I think of ourselves. I mean, we are just a few short years away, and we could talk about this a little bit later, but the work that is going on right now in the white world, I call the white world versus the black world. Right. The black world, you and I can't know about it because it's classified.
Right.
And it gets funded to $100 billion or plus a year. So a lot of black projects going on.
In the white world, we're going to talk about with Tom DeLonge and To the Stars Academy.
Yeah, Arts and Science.
Yeah.
In the white world, they're working right now on faster than light travel. And so I think within the next 20 to 30 years, you're going to see craft built that will be able to go out into the universe, far out, and be circling around a solar system or a planet somewhere else, and maybe even another galaxy. And so that's us now. We're out there 20, 30 years from now. And we're circling above this planet, and we look down on the planet, and we see indigenous life. There's some bipedal thing running around, hopefully it's not more advanced than us, probably less advanced than us. We would probably want to go down and somehow grab one of those creatures and bring them up on our ship and look at them, and test them. We may even want to, if they're doing reproduction type things, we may want to study the whole reproductive thing. I think that's just what scientists do. I mean, we do it today on our own planet with tagging animals and, following them around and watching their migration patterns and things like that. I mean, what does a buffalo think that when he gets his tagged, and then he get loose? I just think
hard to think of us as buffalo, though. When you think about it in that terms,
I know,
right?
But we're not. I mean, we've always been at the top of the pyramid,
sure.
And what we're finding is we're no longer at the top of the pyramid, which is fine. I mean, God created a huge universe. He put a lot of life in it, and it's all over the place. And and some of that life is physical, and some of that life is not so physical. And I call it disembodied even. I mean, we got people channeling things, which I don't recommend, but people do that. And get information. So our universe, the universe, and it's probably multiple universes, because that's what physicists are now saying is it's more than one universe out there, which is mind-boggling. Like, the universe we see is so infinite, and yet we're saying there's multiple of these things, if not hundreds of them or thousands of them, millions of them. It's just hard for our minds to wrap around that and how that would all work. But it's mathematical. Everything is mathematical. So that's the thing that we're finding, is that it's all mathematics. And when I heard Ben Rich speak back in '93, Ben was the retired CEO for the Lockheed Skunk Works, who was also a UCLA engineer, which I was, and he spoke at an alumni event. And he talked about the development of stealth. And he said, look, stealth is nothing more than a set of equations. It's mathematical. It was written by a Russian mathematician. And our guys took the mathematics, we looked at it and said, oh, so if we do it this way, we can make our craft disappear from radar, right? And that's how the F-117 got built. Now, Kelly Johnson, his protege, almost fired Ben over this thing, because he looked at it, he said, that's not an aircraft, that looks like a pile of junk, because if you look at the F-117, it doesn't look like anything we've ever seen. But it was all built based on mathematics. And it does, in fact, fly, and it is, in fact, invisible to radar. So we used that in the Gulf War, I think, in '93. It had actually been built and been flown since '83, so it was flown secretly for 10 years before anyone even knew it existed. And probably if we didn't have the Gulf War, we'd still not know that it existed. So who knows what else is in the black, world in terms of craft capabilities.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's, as recently as maybe 3 or 4 years ago, you might remember this, there's a guy in Texas who has this entire listening station set up in his place. I can't remember his name, but it's fascinating to look at the pictures of it, because he's an entire listening station.
Yeah.
And Texas, this part of Texas that he lives in, happens to be a place where there's a lot of air traffic that goes over from military and whatnot. And not only does he have this listening station, but he also watches the sky. And sure enough, a few years ago, he's looking at the sky, and there are not in the traditional UFO triangular craft, not that, like legit, like stealth bomber things. He photographs at high altitude these triangular shaped craft that are leaving a contrail, so it's clearly clearly an aircraft that nobody has ever seen before.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then a few days later, there's an overflight of actual B-2s.
Oh.
So the military is playing kind of a game right there, where they're like, you didn't really see that, right? But the pictures that he have is fascinating. So to your point, we have no idea in the black budget and in the black world what's going on.
Right.
And it's kind of a problem, I think, for UFO research because it allows it can allow UFO research to go off the rails, right?
Right.
Because you can just you can come up with any idea you want, and it's in the black world, you know, and it can make ufology look a little bit more
pseudoscience.
Yeah, pseudoscience or just wild-haired and crazy-eyed,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering. And I'm kind of segueing here into the white world, and we can get to Tom DeLonge here on this, but I'm segueing for this reason and with this kind of analogy. You know, it used to be, so I'm a private investigator in the real world,
right.
And it used to be that recording devices, like miniaturized recording devices, were the purview of only nation states, right? And the CIA,
now
and the KGB. Exactly. And then over the years now, every year, like, covert recording equipment for civilian use just keeps getting better and better and better. It gets smaller and smaller, more and more capable. Right. And so I'm wondering, with now this idea of Tom DeLonge and to the Academy of the Stars and creating their own craft, are we getting to that now in the real world, where like all of a sudden what used to be the purview of governments and if they are building spacecraft that have faster than light travel, et cetera, which there's a lot of theories out there that they are, and they have that already. Is that now happening in the civilian world, where now we have the capability? It's not going to be as expensive as we thought it was going to be, and we have more knowledge, and these things are more civilianized now. What are your thoughts on that? And maybe start off by introducing like Tom DeLonge and this to the Stars Academy. I have to look at it every time because it's weird how it's. And what your thoughts are on all of that?
Well, let me just make a comment, and then I wanted to actually go back for a minute and answer your last question, which had to do with...
Which was my last question.
Are they good or are they bad?
Yeah.
So at the 2018 MUFON Symposium in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, which you can actually get DVDs for from our store, the MUFON.com store, if you want to go there, MUFON.com. Lou made a couple telling comments. Lou Elizondo.
Yeah, Lou Elizondo. Now let me just let everybody know if they don't know. So Lou Elizondo was featured in the New York Times.
Right.
And I want to get to that as well with something about Grant Cameron and disclosure.
Sure,
okay?
December 16th.
Right. But the New York Times does this story about a project that
Secret
was...
UFO program, Pentagon UFO program.
That's right. And Louis Elizondo was head of that program for many, many years, where they were studying UFOs.
Correct.
So that's the backstory. Okay, keep going.
Yes. So we had Lou as our keynote speaker. He was nice enough to come and talk. And he spoke, his talk was about the Pentagon UFO program, right? And one of the comments he made I thought was interesting. He said, it is not the purview of government to satisfy the idle curiosity of its citizens. It is the purpose of government to protect its citizens. And that statement alone, you think about it, So
that's a huge statement.
That's a huge statement.
Yeah.
People are all looking for the president to step up to the podium and say, ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered extraterrestrials and they're somewhere near here. They're looking for this big announcement. Tell them it's real. Look, the other comment he made was, look, disclosure has already happened. It happened December 16th. Actually, it happened on October 11th when Tom DeLonge and the guys all got on stage. Hal Puthoff, top leading scientist in the world on fast light travel and energy systems. Chris Mellon, former Assistant Secretary of Defense, who's now, all these guys are retired. Stephen Justice, like the number 3-4 guy at Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. Lou Elizondo, the man who ran the Pentagon's UFO program and got frustrated because he was taking this information up the chain of command and nobody wanted to do anything about it. And he said, wait a minute, we got high technology craft flying around our skies exhibiting behaviors that we don't even know how to do. They're not ours. They're not theirs, the Russians, Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, whoever. But nobody wants to do anything about it. They're all pretending like it's the emperor with no clothes. Oh, he looks fabulous in those new clothes over there. So he got frustrated and stepped out and joined this group. And then, of course, Jim Semivan, who I don't really know that well because I've never met him, but he was an operative within the CIA. But my understanding is he didn't have a high-level position, but he was an operative in the CIA, much like I was with IBM for 37 years. So I was an operative in IBM, I guess, sales and marketing. So on October 11th, they came forth with the creation of this TTSA, and they felt that the company should be, there's a name for it.
TTSA being to the Academy of the Stars.
To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science.
Yeah, I like TTSA better.
But they call it TTSA.
Right.
And they're trying to brand that right now. But essentially what they're doing is they've got a science division, which is Hal and all those his guys trying to, and Hal has told me he knows how these operate. We can talk about that. That's a whole other thing we can talk about. And then you got Stephen Justice, who's the engineering part of this thing, trying to pull together how do we build it, right? If we know how they work, how do we build one? And then you've got Tom and his crew trying to put together entertainment, which basically is how do we bring this out to the public in a digestible way?
Yeah, like Tom DeLonge, like is he the front man for? Who was he the front man for?
Blink 182.
Blink 182.
I think
right.
Angels and Airways. I think is now. I'm not really into music.
Yeah,
so
yeah. But of all the people to get.
Well, because
why Tom DeLonge?
Because he has a personal interest in the subject. He's been fascinated with space and with extraterrestrials since he was a kid. Now, I don't know if he's had his own personal experience. I haven't talked to him about that. But he was invited by one of his good friends to attend a family day. And one of my clients was Boeing at one time, and they would have family days. And that one day a year, usually on a Saturday, you could bring your wife and your kids and, your family, your husband, whoever, your cousins, and you could come and you could walk on the plant floor and see what's being built. Now, obviously not, if it's a black project, you're not going to go down. But if you're building a commercial airline or you're building Boeing built the
Dreamliner 787.
Well, the Dreamliner, but it was a military craft. I'm blanking on it right now. But it was like a C-130, but it was a bigger version. They built it out here in Long Beach.
C-17s.
The C-17s.
Yeah,
they built that. That program just ended a few years back.
Yeah, it was built right here in Long Beach.
Right in Long Beach, right. And so I remember attending a family day because they let vendors come too for the Boeing 717, which lasted about 10 years and disappeared from the scene. But it was a regional jetliner to fly city to city, like Fresno to Sacramento or something like. I think
they built that here.
They built it in Long Beach.
In Long Beach as well. Yeah.
So they had a family day where you could come and you could walk about the craft, see how they built stuff. They had little exhibits and things. And so anyway, Tom DeLonge got invited to a family day at the Lockheed Skunk Works. I think it was out in Palmdale.
Yeah, it is.
And so, being a celebrity in the music world, he went out there. He could have gone out there as just a regular citizen too. And he went out there, and because of his celebrity status, he got introduced to some generals and some people high up in the CIA and other folks, and he started talking to them. And I think somehow there was an arrangement saying, you're the kind of guy we need to reach the young folk to put this on. Now, you'd have to talk to Tom to get his story, and you probably could get him on your podcast, maybe, may not, but. So we started doing this. So my hat's off to Tom. He's kind of the most unlikely guy that would do this. But on the other hand, you think about it, well, he's already got a following of millions of people for his records and for the entertainment industry. And so what better person to do it?
Well, and if that takes us over then to Grant Cameron, because I watched a very fascinating talk Grant Cameron gave about this kind of disclosure that's been occurring over the years where either the CIA or the government or somebody is using guys like Stephen Greer, for instance, or now Tom DeLonge, and then there were others before them that they're given information that they then tell the public about.
I don't think our government is ever, because I don't see it as their job to do it. I many years ago, gosh, at least 15, if not 20, Stephen and I asked Stephen if he would do this, made a call on
Stephen Greer, correct?
Stephen Greer.
Yeah.
Made a call on Chris Cox, who was our congressman at the time. I live in Newport Beach. Chris was our congressman. And I said, and I made friends with his office chief of staff. And I told him we were doing this stuff, and I think it's important. I think Chris should know about it. Well, Chris's wife, her brother, his brother-in-law is an astronaut. And we went and spent an hour, Stephen and I, sitting in his office, briefing him on all this stuff. And Chris was very polite. Now, he does this for any constituents. It might be trash truck day or, small kids, who need help. So he's just being polite to his constituency to listen to what they have to tell him. But we're downloading all this information about it. And he listened very politely. I was afraid. I was literally quaking in my boots that he was going to throw us out of his office like, you nut job, please get out of here, don't come back.
Right.
But he was very polite, and I love Chris to death. I think he got a bad rap when he was in charge of the SEC, and they used him as the fall guy for the debacle in 2008, the Great Recession, but it is what it is. That's just how politics work. You know, they find someone they can nail it on, and then it's over. But anyway, long story short, we spent an hour in his office briefing him on all these topics about this situation, right? And Stephen's very passionate about it, as you know. And at the end of it, he only asked 3 questions, if I can remember. He asked a question like, how are they funding this? Which I was blown away. Like it wasn't like, are you sure these are real? Is there anything? It was, how are they funding this, right? Because we were talking about the fact that this is buried deep in the unacknowledged special access project, that it's out of control. There's no one really oversighting it, which I've found now is true. I mean, you know, because I've talked to people who are supposedly in control and they know nothing about it, which Stephen's been yelling about for 25 years. So it's absolutely true in my mind, unless we're all just drunken in his drunken stupor here, and it's not true at all, which I just find hard to believe with all the data we have. But who's funding it? And then where are they doing this? And can you get me the locations? And I will write a congressional letter to him and ask him for that information. I think he had one other question. I'm not pulling it up right now. But I thought that was very interesting. So it wasn't like, I don't agree with you, I don't think this is real, you guys are crazy. It was, how are they funding? Help me find out how they're funding this operation. So I thought in the back of my mind, so he obviously knows there's something going on. Now, he might have just been polite too. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt there. And number 2, you know, where are they doing it at? Because that's the other question, is if we really are funding all these projects, where's this stuff getting built at? Because someone must be seeing it. Someone must be working on it. If you're building advanced craft that are doing.
And on that note, right, see, that for me is the disconnect between government doing these things versus government not doing these. Now, we do have examples like we just talked about, the F-117 program and other black programs that we didn't know about for years.
Right.
So could they hide something like that? I'm sure they could.
Absolutely.
But how do you build
an interstellar spaceship?
Yeah, exactly. Without somebody coming forth. I mean, we have people like Bob Lazar, for instance,
right?
Who,
well, yeah,
that his story. And for people who don't know, Bob Lazar is a, what is he? Is he a nuclear physicist? What is he?
Well,
what's his real?
He never really got as far as I can tell, an actual degree, but. He was probably a guy like my brother who knew how to do stuff he didn't know how he knew how to do.
Right, and that is actually a story. He came out in the 1990s. He claimed he worked at Area 51 and that he was working on recovered spacecraft. Right, that was the story.
Yeah.
And actually, what's fascinating about Bob Lazar is how much his story has actually held up over the course of time.
Yeah.
His story hasn't changed. He hasn't embellished it. He hasn't changed it in any way, shape, or form. He hasn't added to it. And in fact, the thing for me that I find most fascinating about Bob Lazar is the element that they had.
Element 115.
115. And at the time, there were 2 things about him that showed him to be real. One was that he took, was it Bob Lear? Who was that?
Well, he took George Knapp.
No, but not. But before that, it was
Lear. It was John Lear.
John Lear. So John Lear of the Learjet family.
Right, son of.
He meets up with John Lear and he says, "Hey, Wednesday nights at 8:30 at night,
right,
they fly these craft out at Area 51."
Right.
And John Lear says to him, no. Okay, but fine. We'll go out there. We'll check it out. Just sure enough, they have it on video. They go out to the viewing area, and at 8:30 at night on a Wednesday, these craft that are performing amazing feats of aeronautical wonder are flying all over Area 51.
Right.
And so Lear's like, oh my God,
yeah,
this is real.
Right.
And then he goes to George Knapp, who is a longtime Las Vegas reporter, right? Is that?
Yes, George.
Yes.
Is very long time.
Yeah, very, and he's been doing UFO stuff for years. They disclose, and it's during that. So there's the one thing that gives Bob Lazar, in my mind, a lot of credibility, and the second one is that element. Because at that time, 115 had not been discovered.
Right.
And now, like, in the last 10 years or something?
Right.
115 has been discovered.
Right. It doesn't have exactly the same properties that he had described, but there's might be possible reasons for that. Maybe it's a isotope or something. But yes, exactly. The other thing I would say is that he took George Knapp on a tour of, I think, Sandia Labs.
That was a big deal because they tried to erase that and say he never worked there.
Right.
Go ahead and tell that story.
Well, in fact, he knew the guard who let him through. He showed him down all the different hallways, showed him all the different offices, all the different rooms.
And people knew him there. They were like, "Hey, Bob, how's it going?"
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But you can disappear
That's right.
in our world. There's a way that the intelligence community has a way to make you erase you from any records.
Right, and I guess I should give that story a little bit of context so the listeners understand. But what happened is after he disclosed, then the government was like, "Are you kidding? This guy, we don't know who this guy is." And he never worked at those places. And Sandia Labs, was it Sandia Labs? I think it was.
Well, no, he actually worked in S4, which was
No. Okay. But where they tried to discredit and say he hadn't worked.
Sandia Labs, I think, was one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And so he takes George Knapp with him to Sandia Labs, and like people know him at the lab.
Right.
So it discredits even the government saying like he never worked there or anything like that.
Right. Well, just so for your listeners too, Bob Lazar was the gentleman who broke the Area 51 story, and he broke it on George Knapp's television show, news show. George Knapp at the time was a news anchorman, so he was one of those guys in the field. Like he would do stories, reporter. And Bob contacted him. It's actually a friend contacted George and said, "Hey, I got this guy who claims he worked out Area 51 on extraterrestrial craft." And of course, George, being an investigative reporter, said, "My gosh, I want to meet this guy." And so they set up a meeting with it. So he had been recruited to work on this project at S4, which is, I believe, south and
it's the Papoose Mountains, the south portion of the it's a Papoose Lake or Papoose Mountains, one of the two.
Well, there's a huge test range, and part of that.
And there's a dry lake out there.
But that's right, land all the craft, right? So Area 51 is kind of up here, and S4 is kind of down here south, and would be the east, I think, looking at a map. Which is not even an acknowledged area. I mean, Area 51 is now acknowledged, but S4 is not acknowledged. But other than what, and so he broke the story on air, and of course, all hell broke loose. And I think Bob wishes he'd never ever done it because it doesn't. Being involved in the UFO field, being involved in extraterrestrial type of discussion.
Yeah, it's not good for your. It's not good for your
doesn't help
career.
Your career. Doesn't help your marriage. You end up getting divorced. It doesn't help your friendships. Because people distance themselves from you because like you're a little weird, Right. So we're hoping,
which is fascinating because so many people believe in UFOs. I mean, they just did a study recently. It's like 80% of people believe in UFOs.
Right. Well, but believing in UFOs is one thing, but actually having seen one or been that close to something is a whole nother matter.
Sure.
And I go back to my sighting as a kid because we were upside down for like 2 weeks. I mean, it was like your whole worldview is shattered. I mean, it's just shattered, And I was able to piece it back together by saying, okay, I'm going to go figure out how these things work, right? So I went and got an engineering degree from UCLA. I went to work for one of the world's largest research companies, IBM, although I was in sales and marketing. But it gave me the opportunity to talk to a couple of senior VPs of research over the years that I was there, because more than one was there over the years, about the subject. So that, and it drove me to go work for an organization like MUFON as a volunteer for 20 years before I ever ended up getting offered to take it over. So, but for my brother, it was a complete opposite. His world got turned upside down, and he never really. He's recovered now. He's doing well. I've helped him, and he's helped himself through recovery programs and things like that to get back on track. And he's doing great stuff. But he never got married. He never had a family. I mean, it destroyed his life in terms of having a normal life.
So, is that why then the government? I know you've laid down the foundation that it's not up to the government to disclose.
Right.
But in my estimation, if the government does know something is happening, is that one of the reasons why they're worried about disclosures? Because it's going to literally shatter people's views of the world and their place in the world and the universe and whatnot, and that they're worried about chaos and mass hysteria.
I wish I knew the answer. I think the simple answer is national security, because
that trumps everything.
That trumps everything, And when Hillary was running for president and telling everybody she was going to reveal all the UFO files, she add that little caveat, if you go watch the video on it,
that's
said,
right.
unless it has national security implications.
Right.
Well, I said, well, hell's bells. Of course it has national security implications.
And you can say anything has hell. You can say anything has that, right?
Well, this definitely does, and here's
Sure.
why. Because in talking to Hal Puthoff, the way these craft get here, the way these beings get here, is by manipulating space-time.
Right.
So our universe is made up of STEM, space, time, energy, and matter. And we know the E equals MC squared equation, right? That's energy and matter, the building big bombs, but is there another way to take that energy and turn it into a matter? There is. But space and time are a whole other construct, right? So we see this big space out there, but actually time and space can be manipulated. So, and the way you do it is either with a large mass. The way you do it is through Einstein's general theory of relativity. But you can manipulate space and time through mass, But it's hard to carry the planet Jupiter around in your pocket, to affect things, or with high energy fields. And so they're doing it through these high energy fields. So you notice these craft always have circulars, usually lights going around. It's a spinning, rotating electromagnetic field in this thing, going back to what we had thought of as kids, having 3 pulsed electromagnetic engines. That's the same thing these things are operating under somehow. But Hal Puthoff believes that they know exactly how the equations work, and now it's only a matter of engineering it into creation. But it's going to take hundreds of billions of dollars. I think it's going to take a lot of money to do it, but they're trying to get the funding for it. So my hat's off to them. I hope they make it happen.
Do you think they will? Do you think they're going to?
Oh, absolutely. We're going to do it.
Are they getting traction on that at all from private industry? Or?
I can't speak for what traction they're getting or not getting, but yeah, I do believe there are people stepping up and saying, "Hey, we want to work with you on this, right? We want to help fund it." Because they can, think about it. This is a $1 trillion industry in the future, right? Building spaceships to go intergalactic, cruise ships. Now, instead of a cruise down the Mediterranean, you'll take a cruise through, to the next galaxy,
Well, and or colonize another planet.
Right.
What's amazing to me, the telescope technology has gotten to the point now where they can literally look out at other galaxies and say, that's a planet that could sustain life. It's got water on it. Yep. It's the same size as Earth. It's in the Goldilocks zone, as they like to say, not too far from the sun, not too close.
Right.
And they're finding hundreds of those planets now all over the place.
Right, exactly. We're so far not alone, it's ridiculous. In the universe. And the real question is a Fermi paradox,
Oh, yeah. Explain what that is.
Well, it's basically, if everyone's everywhere, then why don't we see them here all the time? And I can't answer the question. All I can tell you is that they are there and they are real. Perhaps they work in higher level dimensionality than we do. Who knows? And here's the thing. Going back to your question, are they good or are they bad? I always ask 2 questions to people. One is, well, let me ask you a question. If they're good or they're bad, these people visiting us, whoever they are, these intelligences, are humans good or are humans bad? Answer that, and I'll answer your question. And so, the answer is probably yes. Yes. Yeah. So, but Michio Kaku in his book Hyperspace, where he talks about the 10-dimensional universe, talks about 3 levels of civilization: type 1, type 2, and type 3. And so where are we on that scale? We're type 0. A type 0 is from basically caveman to nuclear age. And if you don't blow yourself up as a civilization, you get to graduate as an interstellar society, which is kind of the next level, where you can manipulate your weather, you can manipulate your environment around you. Which is kind of what we're quickly and rapidly approaching, again, if we don't blow ourselves up.
Right. And I think, there's been some discussion in the community about potentially UFOs, alien beings. This is going to go on the wild side here a little bit.
Sure.
Actually intervening to prevent nuclear destruction.
Oh, we actually have solid cases with government documentation on that.
Yeah, talk about that.
Okay, well, so back in 1967, I believe it was Malmstrom Air Force Base up in, I think it's in Montana. I could be.
It's one of those North Dakota, South Dakota.
It's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's the middle of nowhere.
Right. Where you put a missile silo.
It can get to
big missile with a warhead on it, with nuclear warhead.
It can get to Russia quick, right?
Yeah, so one of our gentleman who's out on the speaking circuit, and his name's going to come to me, he was in the silo back in 67. It's under 60 feet of dirt and concrete in a triple steel-hulled container with another gentleman. They were the fire officers on the missile, and they were in charge of like 10 missiles, because the way these things work is they're these different they go out from each other.
Yeah, it's like there's one control center, and then there's multiple silos around them that they control.
Right. They're like responsible for like 10 missiles. I could have the number wrong,
right.
But
it's about that.
It's 2 handfuls of missiles, and they're sitting in there, and they get a call from basically the guard gate up above, and they said, "Hey, there's an object over the base, big red object, and it's hovering, and we don't know what it's going to do. So please, lock down everything else like that." So they got that call, and the next thing they notice is that all the missiles are going offline. They're just shutting down one after the other. Boom, 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 boom. And these are fail-safe systems. They're built with. So whatever this craft was, if it was the craft doing it, which there's no other possibility really, they had to go through 60 feet of concrete and dirt, through a triple-hulled, steel-hulled container, into the firing mechanism and then know what to do to shut the missiles off. And he says this is no small task. Robert Salas was his name, and he's out speaking on the circuit, and he's gone public with his information. And you can get this through government records, freedom of information, but it's also published, so it's already been done for you, where the Air Force actually wrote the report up on this thing. Now, Boeing was the contractor for the missiles in terms of maintaining them. They actually had to come out and spend several days to put them back online. It was not a simple task of just throwing the switch and they go back on. You had to go through a certain sequence to rearm the missiles and put them back online. And so, of course, the generals were going crazy. Like, who was it who shut our missiles off, right? I mean, we're defenseless. Now, they didn't shut all the missiles off. They shut the one in this one area down. Why, we don't know.
Well, perhaps a dry run.
Who knows?
Right.
Who knows, yeah. But, I mean, some of this was doing some of those tense moments we've been having in the Cold War. But years later, they come to find that Russia was having the exact same experiences. They had these craft coming over their missiles and shutting their missiles off. So it wasn't just the U.S. It was here and there. Now, there was one instance where a craft came over and started the launch sequence, which is interesting. So that's kind of a scary thing, because they started the launch sequence, and some of those launch sequences, once you start it, you can't stop them, but obviously they were able to stop this one. But that was in Russia. They started the launch sequence going. So I don't know. Are they good at
Somebody up there hit the wrong switch.
Yeah,
right.
I guess. I mean, it's kind of scary when you think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I remember reading about that in the paper, where they said they had a scary situation happen, because I'm sure at that point the Kremlin was on the phone to the White House saying, "Hey, we got a problem here, and it's not us trying to shoot you." I mean, in case the missile got launched, they didn't want to start World War III. I think it'd be great if we just got rid of all nuclear weapons on the planet completely. That'd be my suggestion, but it's hard,
Yeah, the genie's out of the bottle on that one, right?
Anybody can go build one. I mean, you and I could go figure out how to build an atomic bomb.
It's actually not that hard. It's the hardest part of it is the
enriched uranium.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
You have to have the enriched uranium, or you can't do it.
So where do you see? Because there's so many different facets of ufology, right? I mean, there's this consciousness aspect of it. I know that Grant Cameron is following that. Yeah. I'm trying to think of the guy's name. Mike, maybe you can help me look it up. There's a guy along the consciousness line that fascinates me. His name is, he's the smartest man in the world. He's got a 200 IQ, Christopher Langan.
Okay.
Christopher Langan wrote a thought piece, a paper, with equations on solving the consciousness riddle. I've read it's like 15 pages long. I've read it a couple times. I can't.
I understand it.
Yeah, I can understand it. But there is something there to consciousness.
Right.
Is that, and I'm noticing, when I hear people like Grant Cameron talking, or even it's Richard Dolan,
right,
talking. There seems to be this kind of shift to consciousness as being much larger than it really is. And I mean, you're seeing that in other parts of the society as well. You
start seeing, like in my case, I've always wondered, like, did we create that UFO? I mean, did our thought processes, or was it already there and our thought processes linked to it somehow and brought it here? Stephen Greer's been the founder of the CE5 movement, right? And there are people who go out all over the world now in small groups, and they kind of form a consciousness bond and vectoring different object, craft.
Yeah, if you go on YouTube, you can see that they do that all the time.
Right. Yeah, and it does happen. I mean, I've talked to a number of the people who've been out on these journeys, and they tell me it's incredible what they see, this type of thing they see. So there is a strong consciousness aspect to it. Now, MUFON as an organization, our role is to provide a place for the general public to come and report what they see. And that's what we do. So you go to MUFON.com, you click on Report a UFO. We've actually got it set up now where you'll be able to report an abduction or an entity sighting or a UFO or all of them, I mean, whatever you saw, so that we can start gathering this data and start being able to, more than just a structured craft, UFO or orb or whatever they saw. So I'm excited about that. But that's what we do. We provide that thing. And so one of the other things that Lewis shared at the 2018 MUFON Symposium in Cherry Hill was the fact that it was the MUFON data, which is publicly available from our website, just go under Track UFOs, that they used to help justify getting the ATIP program funded.
And the ATIP stands for?
The Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program. So in the military, the role of the military is to protect us from all enemies. You know.
And let's talk about, because Bigelow is behind
Sure,
that, right?
yeah.
What's his first name?
Well, he's not behind it. He was just a contractor.
Right,
So
but what's his first name?
Bob Bigelow.
Bob Bigelow. Yeah, let's talk about him in a second. Keep going with your thought there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Bob's a great guy. I mean, you know, he's been into this field for, 40 years easily, and he has funded it probably to the extent nobody else has ever funded it. You know, where people have an issue with Bob is that sharing data and things like that. I mean, there's stories way back when that, you know, MUFON sold its database to Robert Bigelow. Not true. I mean, we did get a project funded to go try to get rapid response teams to see if we could get any better data, but all the data is in the MUFON database. It's anyone could go look at it. I've lost my track.
No,
here.
you were going to talk about ATIP and
Okay,
Lewis talking at Cherry Hill.
So the military, their role is to protect us. That's what their role is. They're not here to make friends with aliens, or, you know, their job is to say, hey, there's this person there, or beings there, or entities, or whatever, and we don't know what their intentions are. Our job is to say, what if they want to take us over? What if they want to do this? What if they want to do that? And what would we do? I mean, that's what they do. You know, that's what the military does. That's what think tanks do, is they go through all the scenario analysis and then what all the steps are you're going to execute. So it's not like you're caught off guard ever. You know, you always don't. It looks to us like the world state is such that it is that things just happen. No, it's all well thought out. I mean, the meeting with Trump and, you know, Kim from North
Kim
Korea.
Jong-il.
I mean, that's all well. I mean, they know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, it's all orchestrated out. And so, in fact, I had a guy from the who was in charge of Wackenhut, regional manager, once tell me that his father was in the NSA. I just happened to sit next to him on an airplane, and he was drinking one too many, and he started talking to me, and so I started asking him questions. And he told me that, he said, Jan, what you need to know is that all wars are planned. They don't happen by accident. It's a well thought out sequence of how it's going to orchestrate, what's going to happen during the battle, and what's going to happen afterwards. So, I mean, we look at the Gulf War or the Vietnam War or these other things. Those are thought out well in advance of us even knowing that that's where it's headed. And so the scary part of that is you got a few people making decisions on behalf of the planet.
I don't know if I'm going to agree with that one. Just as a poli-sci major, and I spent during poli-sci reading memos about the Vietnam War from the players during the Vietnam War, right? Okay. You know, the president and his advisors and National Security Agency, or not National Security Council memos on the Vietnam War. I'm not quite sure I can believe that.
Well, I'm just telling you, this is what he related to me.
Right. No, I get that. But I want to make that distinction there. I think the war is too chaotic. There's no way. Maybe the actual, okay, we're going to have a war.
Yeah.
I might be able to say, okay, maybe you could see that coming, right? Like, but then actually what happens during the war.
I'm not so sure that Kim, I can't even pronounce his name.
Kim Jong-il?
Kim Jong-il, you know, that
Kim Jong-un? Oh, yeah, it's Kim Jong-un. Who was the ill then? That was his dad? Oh, yeah. Kim Jong-un. Yeah.
Good catch.
Yeah, he's...
Mike knows.
Well, Mike has a strange fascination with Korean culture. That
I can't imagine why.
Well, he's Chinese, though.
Chinese. Okay, well, that's still... You know,
he's American of Chinese descent. Or how about that, right?
No, but I suspect that someone sat down and explained to him, you do this and we're going to do that, and you do this and we're going to do that, and you know, pretty soon you don't exist anymore. So why don't we just work together on this thing? You know, I don't know, but I'm just thinking, you know, you got to be. I mean, he's not going to be running a country if he isn't pretty smart. So,
and Wackenhut is a security company, isn't it?
Wackenhut's a security company. They hold the largest contracts for government facilities. One of those facilities being Area 51. So the other question I asked this gentleman was, so you know, just as a regional manager, do you handle Area 51? He laughed. He said, yeah, that's mine. You know, and he really whispers to me, he says, there aren't any aliens there. Because he knew that was probably my next question, right? Because he didn't know who I was. I was just some guy sitting next to him in a seat on an airplane.
You didn't tell him that you worked for MUFON?
No, I didn't. I actually called him up to have lunch with him. Like, I got his card.
Right.
And it's funny because I did have lunch with him, and we had a great lunch. He thought I was coming to ask for a job. And I was actually coming to find out more about the NSA, the National Security Council, and all this stuff, and what he knows about aliens and everything like that. Turned out he didn't know anything, which is fine. But he was fascinated with what I did, and I shared with him. And then, you didn't know this, but I work with. At the time, I was a volunteer. I was running this local chapter here in Orange County.
So talk about Bob Bigelow, because he really is a fascinating character in the whole world of ufology. I mean, just real quick, he's a former hotel. Does he still own the hotel chain?
I think it's the something Suites. So Bob grew up in a family of real estate people, and during the 70s, I believe it was, when Las Vegas was starting to get built up and the hotels were there, they didn't have enough housing, apartment building stuff. So he built these thing called the Suites, where the workers would, and it's got a name to it, I don't know exactly, but oh gosh.
Look it up, Mike, and see while we're talking.
Yeah, Suites. But there's a name in front of the Suites.
Yeah, it's like Quality Suites or something like that,
something
or
like that.
low-cost suites. There's some name to it, right?
And they're just basic place for people to come, bring their family, live there, and go work every day. And maybe they're there just only for a year or two to work on a project like building the MGM casino or building whatever it was at the time.
Right.
And so he made buckaroos doing this real estate stuff, which allowed him to fund his real passion, which was UFOs and aerospace. In fact, he used the money to create Bigelow Aerospace, which, interestingly enough, bought patents from NASA, bought the rights to the patents from NASA for inflatable habitats.
That's right. And he's got one up on the space station right now.
And now he's got a couple $100 million contract.
What was it called?
Well,
budget suites. There you go. It's not low quality. It's
a
real low cost. It's budget suites.
Budget suites, right?
Thanks, Mike.
But that made him, hundreds of millions of dollars, and so he's taken that money and reinvested it back into aerospace and built these.
And it's a legit aerospace company.
Oh yeah, Bigelow Aerospace out of Nevada, right? It's just like SpaceX or Virgin Galactic or any of these other half dozen companies out there, Blue Horizon. I mean, there's a lot of people pouring a lot of money. I mean, people will say, well, why is it the Pentagon's willing to talk about this stuff now? Well, I don't know if the Pentagon's all that willing to talk about it, but the guys at TTSA are willing to talk about it, and they do have contacts back into the government where they can get information that I don't personally have access to, or you don't have access to. Maybe you do, but you haven't told me.
No, I wish I did.
But they're trying to get this information to come out. So Robert was hired as a contractor because when they created ATIP, the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, and I love that name because that's how you get funding in the military. You call something a threat. It's a threat. It's no more nefarious than that. And so they got the funding to do this, and they needed a lab where if they got any materials or things, they could go test it. And so they put out a bid to all the aerospace companies saying, hey, the only one who responded back was Robert Bigelow.
Of course.
And so by default, he got the contract.
And he's also friends with Harry Reid, who happened to be.
Well, it didn't actually have anything to do with that because, see, in government procurement, you can't you have to recuse yourself. I mean, you can't. He was friends with Harry Reid, and a lot of people think that's how he got the contract, but it really was they did the normal procurement process. They put it out there, and the only person who responded was Robert. So I mean,
lucky him.
I can see Boeing saying, "Do we really want to have a contract where we're going to test UFO materials?" Probably not. Right. I mean, because there's a whole nother.
There's still stigma to it.
Stigma, PR. They don't want that getting out, right?
Right.
So who knows why they didn't bid on it? But nobody bid on it except for Robert. So he got the contract. But he's basically a hands-length contractor. He's not parcel of the whole operation. Although sometimes I think early on it looked like that because there was some information on there about Bigelow and Colm Kelleher, who's his number 2 guy. But they're just scientists. Robert is just a real salt-of-the-earth man who was fortunate enough to build these budget suites and manage his real estate empire to a point where he created a lot of cash flow. And with that cash flow, he pursued his personal passion, which was UFOs, and the whole subject of aerospace. And so my hat's off to him. I mean, I think he's an American hero, and I about fell off my chair watching 60 Minutes last year in 2017.
Oh, yeah, that's right. He did a big interview on that.
They did a big interview on Bigelow Aerospace, and they asked him at the end, so what is this fascination you have with UFOs? And he went through a nice thing, but he basically said, look, they're here, they're real, they're on our planet now. And I'm thinking, wow, you couldn't ask for a bigger endorsement than that.
And do you think that, and what's he in? So there's so many ways to go with Bob Bigelow because there's a lot going on with the guy. You've actually interacted with him on various things. I mean, he's funded things for MUFON, hasn't he?
Well, it's going back 10 years, so I haven't spoken to him in 10 years. But 10 years ago, he approached MUFON and said, I have someone who wants to fund a project, and they'd like to know if we were able to pay to have your investigators within 24 hours on the best cases, could we get better data from the database. And so we structured a project, lasted about 8 or 9 months, where we were able to triage incoming reports, figure out our very best ones. After our investigators went there and did our work, we have whatever tools we have available in a volunteer organization. He's sitting on thousands of dollars of instrumentation and scientists he's paying to be on BASS, which was the Bigelow Advanced Aerospace Studies something. Google BASS, B-A-A-S-S, B-A-S-S. I always get it mixed up. But I think it's Bigelow Advanced Aerospace System Study or something like that. Should be right there. It should be right there.
Yeah, there it is.
Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. So it's Bigelow Advanced Aerospace, Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. That's BASS, B-A-A-S-S. And we would then ask the witnesses, and it was very few cases that we were actually looked at, because although we get 500 to 1,000 cases reported to us a month as an organization, when we really go through them, there's probably only about 5% that are really interesting. I mean, they're such that definitely this is not us, So those were the cases we went through. We call them Category 3 cases, Category 2, 3 cases. And we would ask the witnesses, do you mind having another set of scientists come in and talk to you? And I think it was only a handful that actually happened on. So after 9 months, the program got discontinued, and they were very clear that they didn't want any funding going to MUFON. It all had to go for expenses. So in other words, it had to be airline tickets, hotel rooms, rental cars, They wouldn't even fund equipment for us, so we had to still use our own equipment. But we did it for 9 months, and then the project terminated. They decided not to re-up it, and that was it.
I mean, he has delved into the strange, though. He bought Skinwalker Ranch, which is this very famous ranch. There's actually a documentary out on this.
Yes.
I haven't watched it yet.
Well, yeah, it's going to come out. There's another movie.
Is it coming out? Oh, it hasn't come out yet.
Right.
And
Jeremy Corbell, I think, is the producer.
Right. And look up Skinwalker Ranch for me, Mike. I can't remember, which state is it in?
Utah.
It's in Utah.
Upstate Utah.
And it's got all these strange things that happen on the ranch. And he actually bought the ranch. Yep. And then put a scientific team on the ranch.
Right.
And they all experienced
Yep.
crazy weird things, but it was like they could never actually document much, because it was like the happenings were either ahead of them.
Right.
They were always ahead of them.
Right.
And
like they almost knew what was going to happen next.
What was going to happen next? Yeah, it was absolutely what do you know about Skinwalker Ranch?
Well, I only know that there was a nice book written by Colm Kelleher and George Knapp, who investigated it. But it was just very strange happenings, like people showing up in rooms next door who weren't there moments before.
There's a UFO connection to that as well, though.
Right.
I mean, that there's been multiple sightings there.
Well, I don't know about the sightings. I do know they've had strange animals show up. They've had a vortex show up where a creature crawled through the vortex and into this reality. It's been some really weird stuff. And so there is a connection here with paranormal with UFOs, and UFOs are certainly part of the paranormal genre. We try to stay more, not so much nuts and bolts, but just UFO related as an organization. But we do have researchers who are MUFON field investigators who also do paranormal type research. There is a connection, and Ben Rich actually shared that with me at a UCLA alumni meeting, where he said that how these UFOs work. He asked me the question, how does ESP work? And I was asking him the question, how do these advanced to the stars kind of engines work? He said, well, let me ask you a question. How does ESP work? And I just flipped back to him. I don't know, all points in space and time are connected. And he said, that's how it works. And he turned around and walked out. It was, at the end, you could Google I've had interviews on it many times. But I'm losing my train of thought again.
Well, no, it's about Skinwalker. All points point to the paranormal and UFO. There's a connection there.
Yeah.
But what is the connection?
Well, I think the connection is a space-time anomaly, because it was interesting. There's a research scientist up in Cal State Fullerton who's written a book on spaceships and stargates. I have to get the right one, but it's James Woodward, W-O-O-D-W-A-R-D. Great guy, and he's got a whole bunch of these guys on an email list. There's about 50 of them who do they're doing energy and faster than light research around the world in the white. Some of them probably do or work in black projects, I imagine, too. But I was in his laboratory up at Cal State Fullerton here, just north of here, about 3 years ago, and he was showing me this Mach effect, which is a part of Einstein's general theory of relativity. Which basically, you can get thrust out of nothingness, which is, let's go back to the perpetual motion that my father used to talk about as a kid. You know, we have a hard time realizing that, but it has to do with how masses interact with each other. And so he's working on his project, and as I'm sitting there in his lab and he's showing me the test results on the oscilloscope, he turns to me and he says, you know, Jan, probably 100 years from now. And then he paused and he said, no, maybe 20, 30 years from now. He says, you'll be able to have a wrist watch, a device on your wrist that you can actually put in a place and a time, push a button, and your own personal wormhole will open up and you'll be able to crawl through it to that place and time, space and time. It might not even be in our universe. It could be someplace else. I mean, so I said to him, Jim, I said, if that's true, you've just explained how all these UFOs work. And go back to Skinwalker Ranch. Maybe that's how all this stuff works. It's coming through some kind of its own little wormhole.
So you're telling me that a tenured university professor is saying that in our lifetime, we are going to be able to open up a personal wormhole and go potentially to another universe or to another.
He started off by saying next 100 years, but then he altered it and said, I think maybe within the next 20 to 30 years, because he knows the research that's going on in this. And go back to Hal Puthoff, who talked to me when I called him after I saw him on this October 11th broadcast. He's a longtime member of MUFON. He's the only physicist who picked up the phone and called me when they went public with the fact that Ben Rich had made the comments he did about us having the technology to take ET home and traveling to the stars, because he wanted to know exactly what Ben had said to me. But he knows from all this research that's going on that it's there. And even Hal has said, we know how they're doing it now. We know how they're getting here. It's manipulating space-time. And they know that they're not doing it with large masses. They're doing it with energy, high energy fields. And so it's how do you ramp up that energy field to that level where you can actually begin manipulating space and time. And so...
well, it seemed to me there are two issues there, right? Two issues being the energy, but computing power. I mean,
right.
how do you decide where you're going in space-time?
Right, or how are you going to get back?
And what, exactly, how are you going to get back? I mean, there seems to be computing power that maybe...
Yeah, we have a lot of people disappearing from our planet. I don't know if you realize that. I mean, we had David Pilates.
Pilates, I wanted to talk about him for sure.
Yeah,
we could segue to that right now. David Pilates is absolutely fascinating in what he's finding. Can you talk about him?
Yeah, he's a former MUFON field investigator, but he's done his own...
He's also a former cop, isn't he?
Yeah, he's former law enforcement.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, Pilates,
and he came by accident upon the fact that people are disappearing in our national forests. They're just literally vanishing.
Okay, so I'm gonna. I know you're not David, and I'm gonna try to get him on the show at some point. But you know, the counter to that would be, well, it's a national forest. Of course, people go missing every now and then, and we don't find them because those are such big places. But he actually has an answer for that, right?
Well, the answer is there's no body found. There's no skeleton found. Sometimes they'll have fragments of their clothes found. You know, like a shoe or something like that, but they've never found the actual bodies. And this isn't like one or two people. We're talking thousands of people. Right. And in all, and so what it turns out, what people don't know, is these national forests are they're almost like their own countries. I mean, they're not part of the federal law, so they don't have to report missing people. So they don't. And so he was told by a couple of the park rangers, because something happened where somebody he knew got disappeared. I don't remember the exact story. He could share it with you on his show. But he started asking questions about it, and they said, oh, this happens all the time, David. You should know this happens all the time. So he started investigating it, started turning up thousands and thousands of cases of people who just vanished. I mean, literally things like a family of 7 climbing up a hill, you know, and all of a sudden they turn around and the boy that's with them is just gone, right? They run back and look all over, he's gone, you know. Or he gets found on a mountaintop a mile away, up on top of a ridge. How do you get from here to there?
Sometimes it's even further than that and higher than that.
Yeah.
They'll find them on, there's been reports of like 5-year-olds being found 20 miles away on a peak that's at like 10,000 feet.
Right, exactly. And so how does this happen? You know, it's, but go back to, if you can manipulate space-time, you can do pretty extraordinary things.
So, but is that... So the question that I come up with on that is that something related to the abduction phenomenon, or is that just something that's...
I think it's just advanced capabilities. I mean, I personally think these are extraterrestrial beings or advanced beings who have access to physics we don't understand how it works, and they're just able to use that to manipulate space and time and do what they do.
But they're just disappearing people just to disappear them? I mean, has anybody looked into the why?
Yeah.
Yes, why?
I don't know that he's gotten to the why.
Is he gotten to the why, or is he just basically saying, hey, there's a problem here?
Well, he's kind of like MUFON. We're just documenting the fact this craft was seen, this entity was seen, this being was seen. You know, because if you don't have the data, then you really have nothing to go research. You know, and then you can always go back and look into it much deeper. Which
brings me to what you made me think of this while you were talking about it, and that's is it the 37th parallel? There's a lot. There is a lot of study now in the 37th parallel, and how much UFO activity is around there. And not only that, but you know, if you look on a map, I think that Area 51 is right on the 37th parallel, and there's a lot of like military bases that are along that parallel, but maybe that's why there's so much activity that coincides with that. Cattle mutilations.
Right.
That's the cattle mutilations. Who's the guy who just studies cattle mutilations?
Well, there's a lot of them, but Chuck Zukowski is our MUFON director of animal mutilations, and he's the one who came up with that theory.
And that's like a real thing.
Yeah.
Like cattle mutilations are a real thing that they have. The FBI, even back in, was it the 70s or 80s?
Right.
They went out and they investigated because all these ranchers were saying, hey, our cattle, they're surgical. They'll have their udders surgically removed, or their organs surgically removed. There's no blood. Sometimes their eyes and their tongues and their mouths are surgically removed. It looks like they're burned out with maybe like a laser or something like that.
Right.
And there's no evidence whatsoever for this.
Right. Exactly.
And the FBI went out and investigated for years. They were never able to come up with an answer on it.
Right. My wife, her father and mother grew up in the San Luis Valley, which is in the southwestern part of Colorado. It's actually the highest plain in the United States. I think it's up around 10,000 feet. And it's a farm and ranch lands. And they have themselves, the family, seen this phenomenon where these cattle just show up dead and their body's completely drained of blood. But there's no blood splattered anywhere. It's completely clean. They have these incisions where they cut out their tongue or their cheekbone or core out their anus. And so it's almost like someone was taking a sample. You know, we'll take all the liquid out of that animal and we'll take all these samples and we're going to leave the dead carcass lay in there.
And I think it's a delicacy. That's what I think.
Oh, okay.
I think it's delicacy. I think they like cow's blood, or they like the tongue, or they they're making a soup or something, right?
I don't know. It's pretty freaky though. I mean, for the farmers too. I mean, they're ranchers rather. You know, they're losing thousands of dollars, and so they're not too happy about it because you're taking their prized cattle and doing this to them, and they could sell that cattle for a couple $1,000 at the market. But I mean, so that's going. That research is going on. You got David Paulides doing missing persons research within our national forest. It makes you wonder what's going on here, right? And I don't know that it's I don't know if it's related directly to UFO activity, but there seems to be some connection to that whole thing.
And as far as MUFON is concerned, then is the charter of MUFON simply to just document, or is MUFON by nature then, because you're documenting, you're hoping to find an answer to what these things are, or is there kind of a cross, like we're just not going to document, we're also going to try to find an answer on these things?
Well, so let me just answer that very simply. We have a mission, we have some goals, and our mission statement is the scientific study of UFOs for the benefit of humanity. So it's really in two parts: the scientific study of UFOs, which is collection of data. If you don't have data, you don't have anything to talk about. People say, oh, it's just a bunch of stories. Well, no, if you have data, you can actually correlate data. You can actually find other witnesses. You can do a whole lot of things. You can take measurements. You can find out speeds, velocities, heights, transition. You could figure out what the humming noise is, the buzzing noise. Collecting the data is very important, and that's what MUFON does. We provide a place for the public to report things, and then we have investigators who go out and investigate and make sure we get the database clean and clear. The second part is for the benefit of humanity, and that's really like, so what do you do with the data? It's one thing to collect it, but you got to do something with it, right? And so our goals are three. Basically do UFO field investigations, do UFO research, and educate the public. So field investigations, we have field investigators who go out, contact these witnesses, get the information. Most of the times, now many of the times it ends up being something mundane, aircraft, satellite, the space station, whatever. A balloon, yes, they are balloons up there. The Google balloons one. We get a lot of those reported. But the good thing about that is that you can actually go find out where exactly it was and look exactly where the person was looking and say that's what they were looking at.
Right.
So it's not like occasionally we'll get people saying, "Oh, you're part of the NSA." This other thing. We're for a 501c3 nonprofit. There's 3 employees: myself, my office manager, and an assistant. That's it. The rest of everybody else in MUFON, all 4,000 are our investigative team is about 800 active. Are all volunteers. They all volunteer their time. So and they do a tremendous job. My hat's off to them.
And I'll stop you on that too, because I remember a while back you showed me the field manual for your investigators.
Right.
That's the real deal.
Right.
That was one of the most impressive training manuals I've ever seen.
Right.
Right. Bar none. I mean, even from my cop days and going through the academy.
Right.
MUFON has really spent a considerable amount of time producing a manual that rivals most anything I've ever seen in terms of investigation. I mean, it really is exceptional.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Cameron. Yeah, it's 40 years in the making. It's staying on the shoulders of giants, people who've been doing this thing since the 60s, 70s, 80s. It's on its 6th edition, probably more like its 7th, really, because we've done several of the 6th editions, different things. But no, I mean, it's based on experience of going out and working this thing. I always say all it takes is time, money, and resources. People, time, money, people. And in a volunteer organization, you're constantly turning people over because they're either having family issues or losing jobs, or they just get burnt out from doing it too much. So we continue to train people and then put them in the field to do this. So that's our first goal, which is field investigations. We're not just going to take someone's story at face value. We're going to actually contact the witness. We're going to find out if they're a real person. We're going to find out, corroborate what they've said to be true, whether it's true or not. Like, I was in the Air Force in 1961, and I worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I saw an alien. I've had that story come to me. Well, first off, was he really in the Air Force? Because there's a DD 21 or whatever.
Yeah, you can look that stuff up. You can find it. It's public record.
Public record. Yeah. Was he really stationed at Wright-Patterson? Well, you get their work, their military history. Did he really work in that department at Wright-Patterson? You can kind of track it all the way down. Now, the thing you can't really prove is did he see the alien or not. But it's like, why would he tell us this story? Because again, I go back to telling people stories about UFOs and or extraterrestrials or other entity type beings is not a career enhancer, it's not a life enhancer.
That's right.
And you certainly don't make any money out of this. Other people say, "Oh, they're just trying to make money." There's no money. I can just tell you, there's no money. God bless people like Robert Bigelow who are willing to put their personal money into it.
Isn't there something to be said though that there is money to be made for the authors and things like that? Like I'm sure David Jacobs.
Well, you can, but you don't. I mean, you're not going to become a bazillionaire. None of these books sell 1 million copies. I mean, you might sell 10,000 copies or something. So you could get a stream of income coming in. I think that's how Richard Dolan is living right now. He's always writing books and doing speaking engagements.
And he has like a little publishing company too, doesn't he?
Yeah, but he does that mostly to help other people out who don't know how to get a book published. So, right, but I mean, you're not going to be a millionaire. You're not going to live in the big house and the ocean view, and that's just not what it does. Not fund that kind of a lifestyle. Right. Stanton Friedman's probably the guy who's been doing it the longest, over probably 50,
he's been like forever.
50, 60 years he's been doing this.
And he's still, and that guy is timeless, man.
Yeah, he's exactly the same.
He's gotten older, of course, but he is sharp as a tack. Yeah. What is he? He's got to be like in his 80s or 90s?
85, I think he's.
He is like on fire.
Yeah. Well, he's trying to retire now. He's trying to slow down a little bit.
He's trying to. It doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, I know it doesn't, but Stan's a great guy.
But he hasn't been doing. He's really the bulk of his work was back in the 80s and 90s. Like the real bulk of his work was in the 80s
on
and
Roswell, and just the work he did for the government on some projects.
And didn't he did the Majestic 12? Wasn't that part of his?
I think the MJ 12 papers. He actually turned those over to Bob Wood, Dr. Robert Wood here in Newport Beach, who worked 43 years for McDonnell Douglas as a PhD physicist to tear those apart. And he and his son Ryan they have a whole site called Majestic 12 on the internet.
Yeah,
where you can
I've
go
seen
see
that
all the
site,
paper and everything. And there's a lot of people on both sides of the counter saying, this is real, not real. That's that.
Well, this is along those lines. The thing that fascinates me about Stanton Friedman's work is how much he really tries to debunk what he's got. So, for instance, on the Majestic 12, for people who don't understand what that is, Majestic 12. Well, explain what Majestic 12 is.
Well, Majestic 12. When the Roswell crash happened back in '47, and some might even think it was earlier than that because there was a crash in Missouri around 1941. But President Truman created a small group, a task group called Majestic 12, which was 12 individuals, and I think it was.
Forrestal was one of them. James
Yeah.
Forrestal was the biggest name, I think, on it.
Well, I think there were 3 people from each of the 3 branches. At the time, it was only Army, Navy, Air Force. I'm sorry, it was Army, Navy.
The Air Force was done in 19. It was actually the Air Force, I think, was done in 47. Yeah,
right.
So it might have been Air Corps, Army, Air Corps, or Air Force, but regardless.
Right. So 6 of them were military, and I think 6 of them were civilian, and they were like top scientists. I don't have the list with me, but I mean, some of the James Forrestal and other folks who were part of the Majestic 12. But their job was to kind of look at this whole subject of UFOs. We have crash crafty on our planet. You want to know, who are these people? What are they doing here? Why are they here? What should we be doing about that? And so they created this little study group that basically is supposedly run this thing. Now, there are a lot of people who say, "Oh, it doesn't exist. It's not real."
But that's what he did. He went in. He took that document,
right,
and other documents like that, and they picked the document apart. Right.
Sure.
They looked at the type style. They looked at the spacing. They looked at what kind of a typewriter could do this.
Right.
Is it really capable back
from that
then?
time period?
Yeah, exactly. Is that how they actually wrote memos in that time period?
Right.
I mean, and boy, I tell you. It's a real clear and convincing case that's an actual document that was produced by the government.
I would say so. I mean, and Dr. Bob Wood's been one of the people who's done the documentation authentication process and run it through its ringer with the U.S. publishing offices and the different things. So he's done a lot of extensive research on that. So I take it as being real.
What are your thoughts on, since we're talking about everything, we've opened the door to all this good stuff, crop circles? Do you guys are crop circles an England thing only because that's where it seems to happen all the time, or are they happening worldwide? Do we have them in the U.S.? Like
yes.
Mostly, I see them in Europe and in England.
Well, for the most part, it's around Stonehenge.
That
area right there.
Yeah.
But no, they happen all over the world.
And is the theory running that those are UFO related? Or is that more in the paranormal realm than UFO realm?
Well, we think they're UFO related. I mean, we've seen orbs in those fields, and then after the orbs have been in the field, the graphs, the pictographs show up. They appear to be some kind of a communication, a pictorial, 3-dimensional communication to us on this planet. There are people who claim that they can interpret those. I mean, that's not the leading thing that MUFON does. We do take reports on crop circles, but that's not our forte. There are other people in the field who that's kind of what they do for a living. So we're aware of them, and we do get them reported to us, but we're not actively, as an organization, pursuing that from a research standpoint.
So you guys are still more focused on what's happening in the sky. And then we talked earlier about the experiencer side of things. Is MUFON doing more of that now then? Or is that just a side project?
No. This is becoming more and more our core. I mean, it's always been kind of on the outside because it's not about structured craft. It's about beings and entities and interactions with humans. But the ERT, Experiencer Research Team in MUFON, if you go on our website, MUFON.com, and you go on the right-hand side, about a third of the way down, you'll see a thing called ERT, Experiencer Research Team. You can click on that. It'll talk about who's the team members, what exactly they do, how they do it. We have a survey that people could take if they believe that they're having interaction with humans, that they can take this survey. And that actually links you into the group. You give us permission to contact you, we will contact you. I should say the group will contact you. And you're assigned to someone who can talk to you about your experience. And so the beauty of this is that people who have these experiences, just like when I had my sighting experience, I actually went to school on Monday. And my best friend Tom, we were out on the playground, and I started relaying my story. That was on Monday. Hey, you won't believe what happened to me over the weekend. I told him the whole story, right? And he's listening. And I could see him staring at me, right? And so I paused so he could say something. And his next words out of his mouth were, "Do you want to go play baseball?" And I said, What? Didn't you hear that? And so I realized then, bing, a little light went off my head. Oh, you can't talk to people about this because it's so far outside their worldview that it doesn't exist.
Yep.
And so Now think about someone saying, "Oh, I had an entity, a being in my room, and he was telling me these things, or took me aboard his ship." I mean, people would really think you'd gone off the deep end.
Right.
So we'll get these phone calls from people saying, I can't tell my wife this, I can't tell my kids this. They'll think I'm crazy. They'll have me committed. But thank God you're here, and we'll spend time talking to these people. Not me specifically, but we have this team that's in place. So we usually direct them to fill out the survey. That puts them into the system, and then we have people assigned to them. They generally want one of several things. Number one, they just want someone to talk to that they can relate to the thing. Number two, they may want to talk to a hypnotherapist and see if they can retain any other memories. Sometimes it's not good to do that because all you might do is bring up stuff that's just going to traumatize you more. Some of them need help with post-traumatic stress because they're suffering, like my brother did, suffering from post-traumatic stress, and they need a therapist or someone to come work them through the PTSD. Some of them want to be part of a support group where they maybe meet once a month, sit in a circle, and they'll talk to each other and share with each other their experiences. And because now they're talking to people who had the similar experiences who aren't going to judge them, right? So it's any number of things. Maybe they just want to report it to us. They say, this is important. Someone knows this is happening, so I want to fill out a report and do that. So whatever it might be, we get them to the resource they need. Now, honestly, sometimes there are people who are suffering from mental illness. Yeah, that's a fraction of those cases.
I was going to ask that. I was going to ask that question because for people who are listening to this, who are like, "This is just insanity."
Cool, sure.
There are consistencies between their stories that lend a lot of credibility to what they're saying.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely.
And so my guess is that your number of mental illness cases are probably pretty low.
Yeah, I think it's a fraction of what we actually get.
Right.
But and we do refer them back to a doctor or to what we think they need.
Are there therapists that are dealing with this now?
Absolutely.
On more of a okay, this is actually a phenomena. Yes, it's happening.
Absolutely.
Really? And so how's that? Have you?
We actually have a list we keep, and so if people call us and say, "I'm so and so having this experience, and I would like to talk to a therapist," we have a list of people who actually work with these type of clients. They take them on as clients. Now, most of them get paid because they're therapists. They need to make a living,
sure,
right?
Of course.
But they're non-judgmental. They know that it's real. They're willing to take on these clientele, which is a big step forward because a lot of these people had nowhere to go, right?
I imagine the therapist probably doesn't. How do you guys find a therapist that's like, oh yeah, I believe in abduction?
They find us.
Right. Okay. I was going to say. Yeah. So they know. Are they experiencers, abductees themselves?
Sometimes they probably. I am assuming sometimes they are. I mean,
right.
You'd have to go through the list and ask them.
Sure.
And a lot of people don't share.
Right.
their experience. I mean, what was shocking to me was to find out how many of our state directors and national directors have actually had their own experiences. When I first took over 5 years ago, I actually sent out notes kind of introducing myself, telling my own personal story, why I'm involved. And I said, I'd love to hear your own personal stories. And I was just flooded in. People, sightings, onboard craft. I mean, it was everything, abductions, this, that, and the other. But that's what gets people really engaged in this when they're confronted with it firsthand and they know it's real. And they're trying to figure out what is it, why is it here, what is it doing?
And David Jacobs, we've talked about David, he did a huge study. He did abduction research.
Right.
He did a huge study way back when where, what was it? It was a crazy number. Was it 3% of the population?
Yeah, it was
5%. It was a large percentage of the population.
It was a couple percentage points. It wasn't above 5, but
have been abducted.
Right.
Most probably have been abducted.
I think it was 1 or 2%, but even that's huge when you think about there's
world population.
Right. We're 7.2 billion people on the planet, so if it's 1% of that, you're like 72 million people have been abducted. That's huge.
That is huge.
Yeah.
And it makes. I mean, if it's going on, if it's happening, right?
Right.
It clears up why you see so many UFOs all over the world all the time.
Sure.
Because if you're abducting like 70 million people,
right,
that's a big operation.
Right. And so that's one of the things that people use to debunk the extraterrestrial hypothesis. They say it's really unlikely that people would be coming all the way from out there to here just to take our people in those kind of numbers. Maybe this is more of an interdimensional thing or a paranormal type thing or something else that's going on, right? And I get it. That's very possibly. I was going to say some of the other people, if they aren't suffering from mental illness, we have a lot of our population that's on prescription drugs.
Unfortunately.
We know that's the opiate epidemic. And that can cause hallucinations and things to happen too. So that's another possibility. Wrong medications, wrong dosages. There is a fraction of these things that seem to be demonic. I mean, they're either angelic, demonic type things. And so people have their homes possessed, and we refer them to a priest, and they have their homes cleansed.
Yeah, I think that's a whole separate thing in and of
It
itself.
is a whole separate
yeah,
thing. It is
yeah,
all,
yeah.
but it's all getting reported to us.
Right,
So,
I got
so
it.
just like, balloons are getting reported to us and all this stuff as UFOs, I mean, you got fractions of this stuff. I mean, about a third of our UFOs are IFOs. I mean, they're the planet Venus or a balloon or something. And about
Temperature inversion.
Yeah, whatever. Well, I don't know if we've ever had one of those, but I'm sure we have.
No, you can make up anything, right?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, we actually go figure it out, and we know that's what it is. So, just like that in the abduction thing, I don't think it's all like extraterrestrials coming here to take people. I think it's all these different things that are happening. But at the end of the day, when you eliminate all these other possibilities, it's like there's nothing else left. I mean, it's got to be some other intelligent being coming here, able to, manipulate space-time, however they do it, come walk through walls, take people up into their craft, do whatever they do, which to me is fascinating. And why ignore that? I mean, let's go study it.
Well, that's a great topic there, because as you were saying that, I was thinking the same thing. Like, when is it that when does mainstream science start to say, you know what? There's something here. Like, for instance, just on a side note to that, I have not read the book. I'm not sure it's come out yet, and if it has, I need to get it. But it is about demons, and it is written by it's a psychologist or a psychiatrist who's basically he's been a part of these demonic possessions more from the clinical side. Right?
Right.
He comes in on the clinician side to say, okay, is this mental illness or is it not, right?
Okay.
And he's a legit researcher, and only from the clinical side. And he has come to the conclusion that demonic possessions are real.
Oh, absolutely. I believe that. Yeah,
right.
Absolutely believe that. Yeah.
So you've got a guy here who's willing to at least be open-minded to it and say, well, I look at these cases and there's a certain percentage of them that I just can't.
Right.
There's no other answer other than it's demonic possession. How come the same thing is not occurring in the scientific community when it comes to UFOs and all the things that we've talked about today?
Well, I think it is. I think with particularly it's now, I think after December 16th, 2017, when the Times came out with a front page article on this, the Pentagon had its own little secret UFO program. I think it's now scientists are feeling that they can come forward and study this subject without fear of ridicule. Now, will everybody believe it? I mean, unfortunately, we have people's belief systems here.
Well, I mean, listen, there's people who don't, for instance, believe in climate change, right? But it doesn't mean you shouldn't study it.
Right.
Same thing.
Right, exactly. And so these scientists are studying it, and they have been. Many of them have been studying it quietly, privately. It's not their day job, but it's their passion and their secret luxury, if you will. But now, what really keeps them from doing it is funding. I mean, that's honestly. I mean, the National Science Foundation, UFOs, forget it. That's off the table. It's pseudoscience. We got to talk about UFOs, or whatever. I mean, we need to remove our blinders. There's a great quote on our website under about MUFON, and it basically says something to the effect. I'll try to paraphrase it. That the sign of an intelligent mind is the ability to hear something without necessarily believing it, and there's listen to something without necessarily believing it. And it was by Aristotle. And that's, I mean, like my wife will get on me, like, oh, you believe all this stuff, Tom someone tells you believe it. I said, no, it's not that I don't believe it. It's that I listen to them. And I put it into the gray bucket or wherever, and I look for other corroborating evidence that supports that. And there's a lot of corroborating evidence out there. Now, the other thing, some of the more conservative scientists say, well, those are all just stories people make up. Well, the thing is that it's people all over the world making up the exact same story, and they don't know each other. They're coming forward with what they know to be true from their own personal observations, and these observations all align. So why don't we, instead of pretending it doesn't exist, why don't we study it, And so that's the second goal of MUFON, which is to promote research on the UFO subject, for the purposes of trying to make these breakthroughs in consciousness and in transportation and energy. I mean, there's huge benefits that come from studying the subject if we just allow our scientists and engineers the wherewithal to do it without fear of ridicule, and fund them. We got to fund them, That's the other thing I think the TSA group is going to help do is get our elected leadership around this thing, saying this is something we should not be ignoring. And I'm all for that. I mean, I'd love to see that happen.
And as MUFON moves forward from here and grows and whatnot, what do you see MUFON continuing what it's doing, or do you see it changing in any way, shape, or form, or adding new things to the mix, or where do you see the direction of MUFON at this point?
Well, I mean, basically, in my mind, we're going to continue down the path we've been, which is collecting the data and making it easier for people to report the interactions that they have, and trying to get that out to the public, making that available to, you know, real scientists who can actually use that data and then help make some changes on this planet in a positive way. But, you know, one of the other areas we're looking at very closely is the whole policy area. You know, like, okay, now we know they're here, like, and we're just part of a bigger universe of intergalactic, you know, United Nations, as it were. What's our role? How does that play out, you know? And we're looking at that right now. That's going to take some time to make that happen and come about. And the other thing is should we be advocates? I hate to use the word, where you go on Capitol Hill and you push your agenda. But
lobbyists.
Lobbyists, yeah. Should we be lobbyists? I mean, not that you need laws on UFOs per se, but you know, should we be educating our elected officials and those folks and being more proactive in doing that? And so we're looking at doing that as well. You know, just getting the information to them so they can see it themselves. And a lot of it has to do with people's color of their glasses, right? Because if they don't have their paradigm doesn't allow UFOs or these in. I think with these changes that are coming with the December 16th, well, the October 11th announcement.
Yeah, you mentioned that, like that was the disclosure. Yes, right? Yes.
I'm thinking that's as good as it's going to get.
Well, so I don't disagree with that, but at the same time, I look at it and I'm like, it's still kind of like was anticlimactic.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it almost as if it was a disclosure, but not enough of a disclosure. Like the only thing that really works is when they come and land on the White House lawn, which is what everybody kind of says, right? That's the only thing that works for most people.
Right. And even then, it's probably a Spielberg film being made.
That's right. You know, there's an interesting story about Spielberg.
Okay.
Have you ever heard the story about Spielberg?
Well,
there was a UFO that landed at a military base many years ago.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Yeah.
I do.
And there was actual film of the UFO landing and beings coming out of it, right?
Right.
And that was shared with Steven Spielberg before he did Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and he actually based some of the scenes in the movie on that film that occurred.
No, I do. I believe the film was based on that. Now, whether he got it from the military or whoever, but I do believe that's what the film was based on. Exactly.
So along my lines there on the disclosure, right? Yeah. So we have this official disclosure,
right?
But it's not. It kind of was. It was.
Well, people,
like I said, it's anticlimactic. I mean, is that enough though? You think to push it over the edge to get more and more real funding for science out of this, or do we just need more of those to come out?
Well, we need more of this coming. I mean, the answer is I think it's been a big push because I had friends of mine, particularly at my church, who were questioning, why are you involved in UFOs? It's a little weird, for a Christian man to be doing that. And so when that came out, those same people were coming, hey, did you see the thing? And so that was kind of a vindication. I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, it's like, what I've been telling you for the last 50 years is true.
Right.
So the anticlimactic part for people in the UFO field is that, there's really no new data that's come out that we didn't already know, and so people are frustrated.
I think I was a little frustrated by that, right? Yeah. It's like, come on, you're only showing me 30 seconds, if that, of what was, a very longer clip, right? And how come we can't get more of that? If you've shown us this, is the other stuff just so overwhelmingly convincing that you're afraid to show it to us? That was kind of the feeling I got from that disclosure.
I asked Lou, I said, hey, Lou, when are you going to show us the videotape of the alien in the window waving back at the pilot who's chasing him? Just tongue-in-cheek. But, the reason, and we asked that exact question to Lou and the TTSA team, and the answer we got back was, that has to go through a clearance process. Now, they weren't classified videos that were shown. That's one mistake. People claim those are classified videos. Right. They were highly sensitive videos that they were able to get out of the thing, and they still need to get the Pentagon to sign off on releasing the videos.
So, but why? I mean, they've gotten this far. Why not? Like, what does Lewis say about? every time I hear him speak, he's always very measured in what he says. And it's clear to me that he knows more and that he is, for whatever, I mean, I'm sure because of his security clearance and not wanting to violate U.S. law, he doesn't want to expose more. But there's got to be some conversations behind the scenes where he's like, oh, yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Like, this is, are those conversations occurring that you know of?
With whom?
With Lewis, about like what he's really seen. Like what don't they have more?
Those conversations are happening at high levels within our government at this moment, yes. And those conversations are happening behind the scenes with people who can actually make it happen and fund the research that needs to be done in this area. So yes, those conversations are happening. And the reason Lou is so measured is because he does not want to violate any of his security oaths. I mean, he's been in, he's a true American hero, fought in Afghanistan under General Mattis, almost lost his life on a firefight, which is a whole other story they could tell you sometime. Basically, he wants to make sure that he doesn't violate any oaths that he's made through it. Now, that said, he'll absolutely tell you UFOs are real. They're absolutely advanced technological devices in our skies, that are not ours, and we need to do something about this. I mean, so look, if that's all the message is, and then there's data behind it to back it up, I'm all for that.
What do you think currently? Because I know, obviously, we talked about Hillary Clinton, and if she had have gotten elected, she said if but for it not being a national security issue, and we know that John Podesta, for instance, was incredibly
pushing the agenda.
Yes, of disclosure on UFOs. What are we getting from the Trump administration on that? Do we have any indicators on that? That there's an issue?
I don't have any personal information on that. I don't know. It's funny because I had at least 4 different news media people contact me back during the election wanting to know if MUFON was going to come out and endorse Hillary based on her comments. And I said, well, look, first off, we're not a political organization, so we're not going to endorse anybody. But I said, what we do endorse is anybody who becomes president releasing information on the subject because it's so vital to our future as a human species. So I said, so absolutely, we'd like to see more information come out on it in a responsible way. I mean, we don't want to scare the bejesus out of the general public, but the truth is, wake up, guys. I mean, they're here. We're not alone. And now, does it affect you on a day-to-day basis? For the majority of people, it doesn't affect them on a day-to-day basis. Now, there are people being taken. It looks like a lineage thing. It looks like some kind of a bloodline thing that's being followed here for whatever reasons. But if you haven't been abducted, you're probably not going to be abducted. If on the other hand, if your mother or your grandmother,
absolutely, it's generational for sure.
Yeah, but it's not the entire family that gets taken. It's usually just 1 or 2 people within that family line. So I don't feel like I've ever been taken. Yet I know my brother more than likely has, based on his life and things that have happened to him. Right. It's apparent to me something's happened to him.
Well, I think though that the big problem with disclosure is you still have a large percentage of the population who believe in God, and who would have extreme difficulties with that. I mean, it would shatter a lot of our preconceived notions of what the world is, of what our lives are, of what our relationship is with God, et cetera, to have a disclosure like that.
Well, I mean, I believe in God. I mean, I'm a Christian.
Well, me too. Absolutely.
Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior. But here's how I view it: is Jesus said, I'm not of this world, and apparently with space-time manipulation, you could be from someplace else, not of this world, not of our physical universe. So he was speaking truth when he said that. The other thing, Jesus said 2 things basically when the Pharisees were trying to trap him and get him to so they could lead him to his death. What's the greatest commandment? And Jesus said, well, there's 2 actually. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, which means be connected to the source of everything, which is me is God, the source. Whether you call it Yahweh or whatever, Allah or God, or it's the source of creation, of all the creation. Number 2 is to love your brother as yourself, love your neighbor as yourself, which basically says be of service to others. In other words, be humble to the point where you're willing to do what it takes to help others. And you look at our planet, and we're a bunch of people running on very disconnected. Most of us aren't connected to our source. Very few of us ever help our neighbor. I mean, I think the people who live around me, I don't even go talk to the people. I drive out of my garage, go to work, I come right home and wave, and I don't really know what their lives are going like, but I'm sure they have people getting kids growing up, getting married, people living, people dying. But I kind of keep to my own little cocoon, So we don't do it very well. But that was really all that he came to do. And so people who get all upset about religion, I mean, what I tell people is, look, I hate religion because religion is really man-made. I mean, you got God-breathed word of the Bible, Holy Bible. It's just a historical document. If you read through it, there's nothing in it that's inaccurate. It's just stories of the Israelites, the creation of the earth, and then the Israelites going into bondage in Egypt and getting out of that. And then it leads into the prophecy of Jesus Christ and then Jesus Christ's life. But I mean, it's all historical record. If you go back and look at the names of the people, it's all through other sources besides the Bible have been all corroborated. So it's a truth thing. It's not trying to ram religion down people's throats. But man took that and we created all these world religions. And that's the problem. I mean, it's like all he's saying is be connected to God and to serve your fellow man. It's as simple as that. And that's what people have to realize. That's what Christianity is. I mean, that's what really I think a lot of the world religions espouse is just treating each other better. And if we could do that, maybe we could move into an intergalactic society. Because I think the one thing that's keeping us, holding us back, is because we're still acting so barbaric down on this planet. I mean, our normal course of life is killing people.
Yeah, that's true.
Family members. I mean,
right. We are like. Some of the things that I've read along those lines with abductees and the experiences that they've had, the aliens are not. They're small. They're small beings.
Yeah.
A human can overpower one, and there have been instances where abductees have overpowered aliens. And I kind of think of it like gorillas, right?
Yeah.
Like we're like gorillas to them.
Right. We're big apes.
We're big apes, right? That's all we are.
Yeah.
They really are the advanced beings, and we're just still the gorillas and the apes.
When you think about that, the frailness, I mean, as our astronauts go up in space and spend a amount of time, what first thing that happens is that their limbs atrophy.
Right.
That's why you have. And so if you're an intergalactic traveling alien, well, maybe that's what happens. Your limbs just atrophy.
Well, and I think too, what would happen? I mean, look at our society, right? I mean, we're getting fatter right now because
we are getting fatter
because we are lazier and lazier, right? But I think at some point though, we're going to evolve where, well, I shouldn't say that. I guess the way I look at it is, as more and more things get automated, right? You could see where the human body would actually kind of start to shrink in size because you don't need size anymore to go into the fields and do what you need to do.
Right.
And if you're talking about advanced civilization,
right?
My God, I mean, how advanced? How much longer have they been around than we have?
Oh, we're talking thousands, if not millions of years.
Exactly.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And so
this is the health and fitness section of the podcast.
Right. Exactly. right.
Get off that couch.
Yeah. Stop eating so much, huh?
Get off that couch and start doing some exercises.
So, for you, like, what are you seeing as your interest? Where, as you've looked at these things over the years, how has it changed for you, the whole field of ufology, and where do you kind of want to see it go, and where is it going for yourself? What are the things that are interesting you?
Well, what I'm trying to do is get outbound and get out from preaching to the choir, going to UFO conferences and things like that, and talking to the people who already know it's real, and go out and talk to the general public about it and engage them in a conversation.
You had a TV show at one time that was awesome. It was on History Channel, right?
It was Hangar 1.
Yeah, what happened with Hangar 1?
Well, they didn't pick it up for a third season. That's what happened to it. So we have 20 episodes that are being rerun, which is good.
And that was probably good for outreach.
Absolutely. Yeah, our membership boomed under that whole program. I mean, I don't know why they decided not to pick it up for a third season, but I can tell you what I've been told, and this is probably factual, is that when you put these TV programs together, you've got you got to sell advertising, right? That's where you make your money. So they're looking for a certain segment. In this case, it was males, single males, 25 to 45. That was their target audience, and we were pulling in millions of people, but it was all families and people, older people and something like that. But the people who spent money are the males. They're 25 to 45. That's where the money truck is. And so, if the advertisers don't see that coming in, they're not willing to pay the advertising dollars. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. That's what I was told. So I hope that's true.
So you say you're interested in the outreach portion of it. What else are you doing on that?
Well, getting out to the public and speaking publicly to large groups and on radio shows and things like that, but also engaging scientists and to get them to focus on this as a possibility, and corporations and universities, because if we can get all of our resources focused on this, the second goal of MUFON is promote research. We made it promote as opposed to do research, because we have limited funding every dollar that comes into MUFON is from the public. I mean, it's either through a membership or through a donation or from attending one of our conferences or buying some of our logo wear. That's the only way we make money. And that funds the organization from the standpoint. So we have full-time staff, offices, computers, and all the infrastructure to be able to run a worldwide organization. But getting scientists and engineers really focused on that this is something real. I have an opportunity to go next month to Estes Park, Colorado, where these 30-some scientists who are studying faster-than-light travel from all over the world are going to be there. Italy, Germany, United States. Might even be someone there from Russia, I'm not sure. But I mean, these are people who are interested in getting us out to the show. They don't care about UFOs per se, but they want to get out there. They've actually asked me to speak at that meeting and share our database and kind of what we're doing with these folks. And so through doing things like that, I think we can make a big difference, because if we can get these entities, the universities, the corporations, the private scientists and engineers to focus on this, we're going to get answers to some of these questions, like where do these guys come from? How do they create these wormholes and climb through into our reality? How do they travel from the stars to here? Or are they actually not coming from there? Maybe they're coming from someplace else in space-time, which is, you know, a fraction of a frequency over this way. You know, we just don't see it because we can't. Our visual and hearing and our five senses are so tuned to just this three-dimensional reality we live in. I think that's exciting. If we can make those differences, I think it's not me making the differences. It's me getting the other people fired up who can go do that, and it's through the good work of thousands of these people around the world that things are going to change in a very, very positive way for us on this planet.
And so far, how's your reception been with those groups you've been talking with?
Very positive, very positive. I mean, they're all. I actually did get a chance to speak a little bit last year at this particular conference I'm talking about, and one of the scientists came up to me afterwards because I related my story that I related to you about my own personal sighting, and he came up and he said to me, "You know, when I was a little kid, I woke up one morning and I went in to brush my teeth, and I looked and I saw my father sitting in a chair in his bedroom reading." And I went in and I brushed my teeth and I walked back out. And as I walked out, my father said to me, "Where have you been?" And he said, "What do you mean, I just brushed my teeth?" And he looked up at the clock, 2 hours had gone by. He said, "Now, Jen, I just walked into my bathroom, brushed my teeth, and walked back out. It was like 2-3 minutes, max." But somehow, 2 hours of time disappeared. So now all of a sudden the scientist is thinking, because he probably pushed that out. He pushed that out of his brain as a kid because he was a little kid. Well, maybe I just was mistaken. Maybe I really got up,
right
at this time. Because you do that to yourself. And you talk yourself into believing stuff because it's too unbelievable. So you make up an excuse for yourself. I imagine that that's true of a lot of people who have these experiences. They've kind of said, "Oh, that's just something weird to happen. I'm not going to forget about that," and move on with my life. This made him stop and think, "Oh my gosh, maybe there was something else going on here," right? So, I mean, these conversations are happening one-on-one, and that's how it's gonna occur. But I feel a huge momentum push. I think hats off to these folks at TTSA for doing what they're doing, for all the folks who've stepped out of their government jobs. Chris Mellon, Hal Puthoff didn't step out of a government job. He actually is a science researcher. But Luis Elizondo, Stephen Justice, Jim Semivan, these guys. I mean, trust me, they're not getting accolades from their neighbors for going and starting this thing. And it'll be quite some time before they may even get any kind of a true recognition for it. But they're doing what they believe is right. And just like I have been doing for 50 years, since my sighting. And they're pushing the agenda forward because they believe that's important for the advancement of us as a civilization. Outstanding. Tell us how we can help MUFON out. Well, I mean, if you have an interest in this subject, I would encourage you to go to our website and check us out. If you're so inclined, we publish a monthly magazine called the MUFON Journal, where we have our latest investigations and sighting reports. In fact, you gave this to me earlier, too, the top case interest of 2017. It's very nicely done here. Yes, we had over 7,000 UFOs reported to us last year, and we distilled it down to 241 cases and actually published a book on Amazon.com called 2018 Cases of Interest. It's by MUFON, and you can type that in, and it'll pop up, and you can buy that book for $29. That's 241 cases detailed. Out of those 241, we picked out 13, I think 7 domestic U.S. cases and 6 international, and we published them in this little guide to give to the press at our symposium. And you could actually buy this for, I think, $5 or $10 from our website. But we're just trying to get the information out there that, hey, people are seeing stuff. It's real. Because I think that really drove me crazy before I took over MUFON, and I was just working as a volunteer, I'd always get questions from people. Oh, there must not be any UFO sightings because I never read about them anymore. No, our media doesn't treat it.
Right.
They just don't deal with it.
Right.
Whether they're being told not to do it or they just don't do it. But people are seeing structured craft every day in our skies all over the world. Many of them the same type of craft, large triangular craft, 600 feet on the side. That's one example. Disc-shaped craft, orbs, all sorts of strange things are being reported to us. And then throw in the whole experiencer side of things, and it's a whole nother, it's just a whole nother thing. So we live in a very strange world.
We do, absolutely. And so they can go to MUFON, they can go to the website, they can donate.
They can donate, or they can join as a member. I suggest joining as a member first. If you don't, funds are low. You can actually join on a monthly basis for as low as $6 a month. You can become a member of MUFON.
And you get some swag too, right? If you're a member,
merchandise, you get the magazine. You come see us.
The magazine is quarterly, right?
No, the magazine's monthly.
It's monthly.
Monthly.
Every month. Okay.
Yeah. And you can get a hard copy. We distribute it as an e-journal, so you can do it on your iPad or your tablet, things like that. But if you're like me and you're an old guy and you like paper,
right,
you can have paper sent to your home. We publish it and print it and ship it out. It's pretty costly, so we charge extra for that. But we do it. Yeah.
Outstanding, Jan. Thank you so much for coming today. It was just an absolute pleasure talking with you. And before I get to that, I have to tell the story that I was going to start at the beginning about how we met.
Okay.
I can't forget to do that.
Okay.
I almost left on that. So we met because I was looking for office space one day.
That's
and
true.
You were over by the airport, and I walked in, and I'm like, I look at the thing, and the TV show was out at that time.
Yeah, it was.
And it was like, MUFON. I'm like, MUFON? That's cool. Yeah. So I came up and I talked to you, and you were nice enough to come out and talk to me. And
it was a great building.
Yeah, it was.
it was turned into a drug rehab center afterwards.
Is that what it is now?
They threw us out, yeah. So I've determined there's only two kinds of people making money in the world anymore. It's the people growing the marijuana and then the people treating the folks who've smoked it. Well,
there's only going to be more of that.
There's a lot of that going on. Yeah.
All right, Jan.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks,
I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jan. Jan Harzan, thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Cameron Jackson Show. Remember, you can listen to us on podcast or watch us on YouTube. We want to know what you think. Let us know what you liked, what you didn't like, and what you'd like to see more of. Leave your comments down below. We read them all. You can also contact us via email, CameronJacksonShow@gmail.com. And if you liked what you saw today, give us a like and subscribe. It really helps us out. This studio is funded by my company, C. Jackson Investigations. Need to find someone, run a background check, or catch a cheating spouse? C. Jackson Investigations can handle all of your investigative needs. To learn more, go to cjacksoninvestigations.com.